Welcome back to Sister for Sister Story Time. Today we're reading still The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, chapter title Isis, the Virgin of the World. My name is ChayaFyah, the Hood Historian. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Isis, the Virgin of the World. It is especially fitting that a study of Hermetic symbolism should begin with a discussion of the symbols and attributes of the Saitic Isis. This is the Isis of Sais, famous for the inscription concerning her which appeared on the front of her temple in that city. I, Isis, am all that has been, that is, or shall be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. Plutarch affirms that many ancient authors believed this goddess to be the daughter of Hermes. Others held the opinion that she was the child of Prometheus. Both of these demigods were noted for their divine wisdom. It is not improbable that her kinship to them is merely allegorical. Plutarch translates the name Isis to mean wisdom. Godfrey Higgins, in his Anacalypsis, derives the name of Isis from the Hebrew Eso and the Greek whatever, I don't know, to save. Some authorities, however, for example, Richard Payne Knight, as stated in his Symbological Language of Ancient Art and Mythology, believe the word to be of northern extraction, possibly Scandinavian or Gothic. In these languages, the name is pronounced Isa, meaning ice, or water in its most passive, crystallized, negative state. This Egyptian deity, under many names, appears as the principle of natural fecundity among nearly all the religions of the ancient world. She was known as the goddess with 10,000 appellations and was metamorphosed by Christianity into the Virgin Mary. For Isis, although she gave birth to all living things, chief among them the sun, still remained a virgin according to legendary accounts. Apuleius, in the 11th book of the Golden Ass, ascribes to the goddess the following statement concerning her powers and attributes. Behold, I, moved by thy prayers, am present with thee, I, who am nature, the parent of things, the queen of all the elements, the primordial progeny of the ages, the supreme of divinities, the sovereign of the spirits of the dead, the first of the celestials, and the uniform resemblance of gods and goddesses. I, who rule by my nod the luminous summits of the heavens, the salubrious breezes of the sea, and the deplorable silences of the realms beneath, and whose one divinity the whole orb of the earth venerates under a manifold form, by different rites and a variety of appellations. Hence the primogenial Phrygians call me Pessinuntica, the mother of the gods, the Attic Aborigines Cicropian Minerva, the floating Cyprians, Paphian Venus, the arrow-bearing Cretans, Diana Dictina, the three-tongued Sicilians, Stygian Proserpine, and the Eleusinians, the ancient goddess Ceres. Some also call me Juno, others Bellona, others Hecate, and others Rhamnusia. And those who are illuminated by the incipient rays of that divinity, the sun, when he rises, viz. The Ethiopians, the Ari, and the Egyptians skilled in ancient learning, worshiping me by ceremonies perfectly appropriate, call me by my true name, Queen Isis. The Plangian believes that the Egyptian myth of Isis had a historical basis among Mayas of Central America, where this goddess was known as Queen Mu. In Prince Code, the same author finds a correspondence to Osiris, the brother husband of Isis. Lee Plangian's theory is that Mayan civilization was far more ancient than that of Egypt. After the death of Prince Ko, his widow, Queen Mu, fleeing to escape the wrath of his murderers, sought refuge among the Mayan colonies in Egypt, where she was accepted as their queen and was given the name of Isis. While Laplangian may be right, the possible historical queen sinks into insignificance when compared with the allegorical symbolic world virgin, and the fact that she appears among so many different races and peoples discredits the theory that she was a historical individual. Isis, Queen of Heaven. From Moses' History der Hebräischen Kirche. Diodorus writes of a famous inscription carved on a column of Nisa in Arabia, wherein Isis described herself as follows: I am Isis, queen of this country. I was instructed by Mercury. No one can destroy the laws which I have established. I am the eldest daughter of Saturn, most ancient of the gods. I am the wife and sister of Osiris the king. I first made known to mortals the use of wheat. I am the mother of Horus the king. In my honor was the city of Bubast built. Rejoice, O Egypt, rejoice, the land that gave me birth. See Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. According to Sextus Empiricus, the Trojan War was fought over a statue of the moon goddess. For this lunar Helena, and not for a woman, the Greeks and Trojans struggled at the gates of Troy. Several authors have attempted to prove that Isis, Osiris, Typhon, Nephthys, and Osiris, Thoth, or Mercury were grandchildren of the great Jewish patriarch Noah by his son Ham. But as the story of Noah and his ark is a cosmic allegory concerning the repopulation of planets at the beginning of each world period, this only makes it less likely that they were historical personages. According to Robert Flood, the sun has three properties: life, light, and heat. These three vivify and vitalize the three worlds: spiritual, intellectual, and material. Therefore, it is said, from one light, three lights, the first three master masons. In all probability, Osiris represents the third, or material, aspect of solar activity, which by its beneficent influences vitalizes and enlivens the flora and fauna of the earth. Osiris is not the sun, but the sun is symbolic of the vital principle of nature, which the ancients knew as Osiris. His symbol, therefore, was an opened eye in honor of the great eye of the universe, the sun. Opposed to the active, radiant principle of impregnating fire, here in motion was the passive, receptive principle of nature. Modern science has proved that forms ranging in magnitude from solar systems to atoms are composed of positive, radiant nuclei surrounded by negative bodies that exist upon the emanations of the central life. From this allegory, we have the story of Solomon and his wives. For Solomon is the sun, and his wives and concubines are the planets, moons, asteroids, and other receptive bodies within his house, the solar mansion. Isis, represented in the Song of Solomon by the dark maid of Jerusalem, is symbolic of receptive nature, the watery maternal principle which creates all things out of herself after impregnation has been achieved by the virility of the sun. In the ancient world, the year had 360 days. The 5 extra days were gathered together by the god of cosmic intelligence to serve as the birthdays of the 5 gods and goddesses who are called the sons and daughters of Ham. Upon the first of these special days, Osiris was born, and upon the fourth of them, Isis. The number 4 shows the relation that this goddess bears to the earth and its elements. Typhon, the Egyptian demon or spirit of the adversary, was born upon the 3rd day. Typhon is often symbolized by a crocodile. Sometimes his body is a combination of crocodile and hog. Isis stands for knowledge and wisdom, and according to Plutarch, the word Typhon means insolence and pride. Egotism, self-centeredness, and pride are the deadly enemies of understanding and truth. This part of the allegory is revealed. After Osiris, here symbolized as the sun, had become king of Egypt and had given to his people the full advantage of his intellectual light, he continued his path through the heavens, visiting the peoples of other nations and converting all with whom he came in contact. Plutarch further asserts that the Greeks recognized in Osiris the same person whom they revered under the names of Dionysus and Bacchus. While he was away from his country, his brother Typhon, the evil one, like the Loki of Scandinavia, plotted against the sun god to destroy him. Gathering 72 persons as fellow conspirators, he attained his nefarious end in a most subtle manner. He had a wonderful ornamented box made just the size of the body of Osiris. This he brought into a banquet hall where the gods and goddesses were feasting together. All admired the beautiful chest, and Typhon promised to give it to the one whose body fitted it most perfectly. One after another lay down in the box, but in disappointment rose again until at last Osiris also tried. The moment he was in the chest, Typhon and his accomplices nailed the cover down and sealed the cracks with molten lead. They then cast the box into the Nile, down which it floated to the sea. Plutarch states that the date upon which this occurred was the 17th day of the month Athir, when the sun was in the constellation of Scorpio. This is most significant, for the scorpion is the symbol of treachery. The time when Osiris entered the chest was also the same season that Noah entered the ark to escape from the deluge. Plutarch further declares that the Pans and Satyrs, the nature spirits and elementals, first discovered that Osiris had been murdered. These immediately raised an alarm, and from this incident the word panic, meaning fright or amazement of the multitudes, originated. Isis, upon receiving the news of her husband's murder, which she learned from some children who had seen the murderers making off with the box, at once robed herself in mourning and started forth in quest of him. At length, Isis discovered that the chest had floated to the coast of Byblos. There it had lodged in the branches of a tree, which in a short time miraculously grew up around the box. This so amazed the king of that country that he ordered the tree to be cut down and a pillar made from its trunk to support the roof of his palace. Isis, visiting Byblos, recovered the body of her husband, but it was again stolen by Typhon, who cut it into 14 parts, which he scattered all over the earth. Isis, in despair, began gathering up the severed remains of her husband, but found only 13 pieces. The 14th part, the phallus, she reproduced in gold, for the original had fallen into the river Nile and had been swallowed by a fish. Typhon was later slain in battle by the son of Osiris. Some of the Egyptians believed that the souls of the god were taken to heaven, where they shone forth as stars. It was supposed that the soul of Isis gleamed from the dog star, while Typhon became the constellation of the bear. It is doubtful, however, whether this idea was ever generally accepted. Among the Egyptians, Isis is often represented with the headdress consisting of the empty throne chair of her murdered husband. And this peculiar structure was accepted during certain dynasties as her hieroglyphic. The headdresses of the Egyptians have great symbolic and emblematic importance, for they represent the auric bodies of the superhuman intelligences and are used in the same way that the nimbus, halo, and aureole are used in Christian religious art. Frank C. Higgins, a well-known Masonic symbolist, has astutely noted that the ornate headgears of certain gods and pharaohs are inclined backward at the same angle as the Earth's axis. The robes, insignia, jewels, and ornamentations of the ancient hierophants symbolize the spiritual energies radiating from the human body. Modern science is rediscovering many of the lost secrets of Hermetic philosophy. One of these is the ability to gauge the mental development, the soul qualities, and the physical health of an individual from the streamers of semi-visible electric force which pour through the surface of the skin of every human being at all times during his life. For details concerning a scientific process for making the auric emanations visible, see The Human Atmosphere by Dr. Walter J. Kilner. Isis is sometimes symbolized by the head of a cow. Occasionally, the entire animal is her symbol. The first gods of the Scandinavians were licked out of blocks of ice by the mother cow, Ad Humla, who symbolized the principle of natural nutriment and fecundity because of her milk. Occasionally, Isis is represented as a bird. She often carries in one hand the crux ansata, the symbol of eternal life, and in the other the flowered scepter, symbolic of her authority. Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of Egyptian learning, the wise man of the ancient world, gave to the priests and philosophers of antiquity the secrets which have been preserved to this day in myth and legend. These allegories and emblematic figures conceal the secret formula for spiritual, mental, moral, and physical regeneration, commonly known as the mystic chemistry of the soul, or alchemy. These sublime truths were communicated to the initiates of the mystery schools, but were concealed from the profane. The latter, unable to understand the abstract philosophical tenets, worshiped the concrete sculptured idols which were emblematic of these secret truths. The wisdom and secrecy of Egypt are epitomized in the Sphinx, which has preserved its secret from the seekers of 100 generations. The mysteries of Hermeticism, the great spiritual truths hidden from the world by the ignorance of the world, and the keys of the secret doctrines of the ancient philosophers are all symbolized by the Virgin Isis. Veiled from head to foot, she reveals her wisdom only to the tried and initiated few who have earned the right to enter her sacred presence. Tear from the veiled figure of nature its shroud of obscurity and stand face to face with the divine reality. The explanation in these pages of the symbols peculiar to the Virgin Isis are based, unless otherwise noted, on selections from a free translation of the fourth book of Bibliothèque des Philosophes Hermetiques, entitled The Hermetical Signification of the Symbols and Attributes of Isis, with interpolations by the compiler to amplify and clarify the text. The statues of Isis were decorated with the sun, moon, and stars and many emblems pertaining to the earth, over which Isis was believed to rule as the guardian spirit of nature personified. Several images of the goddess have been found upon which the marks of her dignity and position were still intact. According to the ancient philosophers, she personified universal nature, the mother of all productions. The deity was generally represented as a partly nude woman, often pregnant, sometimes loosely covered with a garment either of green or black color, or of 4 different shades intermingled: black, white, yellow, and red. Apuleius describes her as follows. In the first place, then, her most copious and long hairs, being gradually entorted and promiscuously scattered on her divine neck, were softly deathless. A multiform crown consisting of various flowers bound the sublime summit of her head, and in the middle of the crown, just on her forehead, there was a smooth orb resembling a mirror, or rather a white refulgent light, which indicated that she was the moon. Vipers rising up after the manner of furrows environed the crown on the right hand and on the left. The cerulean ears of corn were also extended from above. Her garment was of many colors and woven from the finest flax, and was at one time lucid with a white splendor, at another yellow from the flower of crocus, and at another flaming with a rosy redness. But that which most excessively dazzled my sight was a very black robe, fulged with a dark splendor, and which, spreading round and passing under her right side and descending to her left shoulder, those rose protuberant like the center of a shield, the dependent part of the robe falling in many folds and having small knots of fringe, gracefully flowing in its extremities. Glittering stars were dispersed through the embroidered border of the robe and through the wholeness of its surface, and the full moon, shining in the middle of the stars, breathed forth flaming fires. Nevertheless, a crown wholly consisting of flowers and fruits of every kind, adhered with indivisible connection to the border of that conspicuous robe in all its undulating motions. What she carried in her hands also consisted of things of a very different nature, for her right hand indeed bore a brazen rattle, sistrum, through the narrow lamina of which, bent like a belt, certain rods passing produced a sharp triple sound through the vibrating motion of her arm. An oblong vessel in the shape of a boat depended from her left hand, on the handle of which, in that part in which it was conspicuous, an asp raised its erect head and largely swelling neck, and shoes woven from the leaves of the victorious palm tree covered her immortal feet. The sistrum is designed to represent to us that everything must be kept in continual agitation and never cease from motion, that they ought to be mused and well shaken whenever they began to grow drowsy, as it were, and to droop in their motion. For, say they, the sound of these sistra averts and drives away typo, meaning hereby that as corruption clogs and puts a stop to the regular course of nature, so generation, by the means of motion, loosens it again and restores it to its former vigor. Now, the outer surface of this instrument is of a convex figure, as within its circumference are contained these four cords of bars, only three shown, which makes such a rattling when they are shaken. Nor is this without its meaning, for that part of the universe which is subject to generation and corruption is contained within the sphere of the moon, and whether motions or changes may happen therein, they are all affected by the different combinations of the four elementary bodies: fire, earth, water, and air. Moreover, upon the upper part of the convex surface of the sistrum is carved the effigies of a cat with a human visage, as on the lower edge of it, under those moving cords, is engraved on the one side the face of Isis, and on the other that of Nephthys, by the faces symbolically representing generation and corruption, which, as has been already observed, is nothing but the motion and alteration of the four elements one amongst another, from Plutarch's Isis and Osiris. The green color alludes to the vegetation which covers the face of the earth, and therefore represents the robe of nature. The black represents death and corruption, as being the way to a new life and generation. Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. John 3. White, yellow, and red signify the three principal colors of the alchemical, hermetical, universal medicine after the blackness of its putrefaction is over. The ancients gave the name Isis to one of their occult medicines. Therefore, the description here given relates somewhat to chemistry. Her black drape also signifies that the moon, or the lunar humidity, the Sophic universal Mercury, and the operating substance of nature in alchemical terminology, has no light of its own but receives its light, its fire, and its vitalizing force from the sun. Isis was the image of representative of the great works of the wise men, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the universal medicine. Other hieroglyphics seen in connection with Isis are no less curious than those already described, but it is impossible to enumerate all, for many souls were used interchangeably by the Egyptian Hermetics. The goddess often wore upon her head a hat made of cypress branches to signify mourning for her dead husband, and also for the physical death which she caused every creature to undergo in order to receive a new life in posterity or a periodic resurrection. The head of Isis is sometimes ornamented with a crown of gold or a garland of olive leaves as conspicuous marks of her sovereignty as queen of the world and mistress of the entire universe. The crown of gold signifies also the honorific unctuosity of sulfurous fatness of the solar and vital fires which she dispenses to every individual by a continual circulation of the elements. This circulation being symbolized by the musical rattle which she carries in her hand. This sistrum is also the Ionic symbol of purity. A serpent interwoven among the olive leaves on her head, devouring its own tail, denotes that the horrific unctuosity was soiled with the venom of the terrestrial was soiled with the venom of terrestrial corruption which surrounded it, and must be mortified and purified by 7 planetary circulations or purifications called flying eagles, alchemical terminology, in order to make medicinal for the restoration of health. Here, the emanations from the sun are recognized as a medicine for the healing of human ills. The 7 planetary circulations are represented by the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge, by the marching of the Jewish priest 7 times around the walls of Jericho, and of the Mohammedan priest 7 times around the Kaaba at Mecca. From the crown of gold project 3 horns of plenty, signifying the abundance of the gifts of nature proceeding from one root, having its origin in the heavens, or head of Isis. In this figure, the pagan naturalists represent all the vital powers of the 3 kingdoms and families of sublunary nature, mineral, plant, and animal, man considered as an animal. At one of her ears was the moon, and at the other the sun, to indicate that these 2 were the agent and patient, or father and mother principles of all natural objects, and that Isis, or nature, makes use of these 2 luminaries to communicate her powers to the whole empire of animals, vegetables, and minerals. On the back of her neck were the characters of the planets and the signs of the zodiac, which assisted the planets in their functions. This signified that the heavenly influences directed the destinies of the principles and sperms of all things, because they were the governors of all sublunary bodies, which they transformed into little worlds made in the image of the greater universe. Isis holds in her right hand a small sailing ship with the spindle of a spinning wheel for its mast. From the top of the mast projects a water jug, its handle shaped like a serpent swelled with venom. This indicates that Isis steers the bark of life, full of troubles and miseries, on the stormy ocean of time. The spindle symbolizes the fact that she spins and cuts the thread of life. These emblems further signify that Isis abounds in humidity, by means of which she nourishes all natural bodies, preserving them from the heat of the sun by humidifying them with nutritious moisture from the atmosphere. Moisture supports vegetation, but this subtle humidity, life ether, is always more or less infected by some venom proceeding from corruption or decay. It must be purified by being brought into contact with the invisible cleansing fire of nature. This fire digests, perfects, and revitalizes this substance in order that the humidity may become a universal medicine to heal and renew all the bodies of nature. The serpent throws off its skin annually and is thereby renewed, symbolic of the resurrection of the spiritual life from the material nature. This renewal of the earth takes place every spring, when the vivifying spirit of the sun returns to the countries of the northern hemisphere. The symbolic virgin carries in her left hand a sistrum and a symbol, or square frame of metal, which when struck gives the keynote of nature Fa. Sometimes also an olive branch to indicate the harmony she preserves among natural things with her regenerating power. By the process of death and corruption, she gives life to a number of creatures of diverse forms through periods of perpetual change. The symbol is made square instead of the usual triangular shape in order to symbolize that all things are transmuted and regenerated according to the harmony of the four elements. Dr. Sigismund Backstrom believed that if a physician could establish harmony among the elements of earth, fire, air, and water, and unite them into a stone, the philosopher's stone, symbolized by the six-pointed star or two interlaced triangles, he would possess the means of healing all disease. Dr. Backstrom further stated that there was no doubt in his mind that the universal, omnipresent fire or spirit of nature does all and is all in all. By attraction, repulsion, motion, heat, sublimation, evaporation, excitation, inspissation, coagulation, and fixation, the universal fire or spirit manipulates matter and manifests throughout creation. Any individual who can understand these principles and adapt them to the three departments of nature becomes a true philosopher. From the right breast of Isis protruded a bunch of grapes, and from the left an ear of corn or a sheaf of wheat, golden in color. These indicate that nature is the source of nutrition for plant, animal, and human life, nourishing all things from herself. The golden color in the wheat or the corn indicates that in the sunlight or spiritual gold is concealed the first sperm of all life. On the girdle surrounding the upper part of the body of the statue appear a number of mysterious emblems. The girdle is joined together in front by four golden plates, or the elements, placed in the form of a square. This signified that Isis, or nature, the first matter, alchemical terminology, was the essence of the four elements: life, light, heat, and force, which quintessence generated all things. Numerous stars are represented on this girdle, thereby indicating their influence in darkness as well as the influence of the sun and light. Isis is the virgin immortalized in the constellation of Virgo, where the world mother is placed with the serpent under her feet and a crown of stars on her head. In her arms, she carries a sheaf of grain and sometimes the young sun god. The statue of Isis was placed on a pedestal of dark stone ornamented with ram's heads. Her feet trod upon a number of venomous reptiles. This indicates that nature has power to freeform acidity or saltness, all corrosives, and to overcome all impurities from terrestrial corruption adhering to bodies. The ram's heads indicate that the most auspicious time for the generation of life is during the period when the sun passes through the sign of Aries. The serpents under her feet indicate that nature is inclined to preserve life and to heal disease by expelling impurities and corruption. In this sense, the axioms known to the ancient philosophers are verified, namely, nature contains nature, nature rejoices in her own nature, nature surmounts nature, nature cannot be amended but in her own nature. Therefore, in contemplating the statue of Isis, we must not lose sight of the occult sense of its allegories. Otherwise, the Virgin remains an inexplicable enigma. From a golden ring on her left arm, a line descends, to the end of which is suspended a deep box filled with flaming coals and incense. Isis, or nature personified, carries with her the sacred fire, religiously preserved and kept burning in a special temple by the Vestal Virgins. This fire is the genuine immortal flame of nature, ethereal, essential, the author of life, the inconsumable oil, the balsam of life, so much praised by the wise and so often referred to in the scriptures, is frequently symbolized as the fuel of this immortal flame. From the right arm of the figure also descends a thread, to the end of which is fastened a pair of scales, to denote the exactitude of nature in her weights and measures. Isis is often represented as the symbol of justice because nature is eternally consistent. The Egyptian Madonna, from Lenore's La Franche Maconnerie. Isis is shown with her son Horus in her arms. She is crowned with the lunar orb, ornamented with the horns of rams or bulls. Horus, or Horus as he is more generally known, was the son of Isis and Osiris. He was the god of time, hours, days, and this narrow span of life recognized as mortal existence. In all probability, the four sons of Horus represent the four kingdoms of nature. It was Horus who finally avenged the murder of his father, Osiris, by slaying Typhon, the spirit of evil. The world virgin is sometimes shown standing between two great pillars, the Jachin and Boaz of Freemasonry, symbolizing the fact that nature attains productivity by means of polarity. As wisdom personified, Isis stands between the pillars of opposites, demonstrating that understanding is always found at the point of equilibrium and that truth is often crucified between the two thieves of apparent contradiction. The sheen of gold in her dark hair indicates that while she is lunar, her power is due to the sun's rays, from which she secures her ruddy complexion. As the moon is robed in the reflected light of the sun, so Isis, like the Virgin of Revelation, is clothed in the glory of solar luminosity. Apuleius states that while he was sleeping, he beheld the venerable goddess Isis rising out of the ocean. The ancients realized that the primary forms of life first came out of water, and modern science concurs in this view. H.G. Wells, in his outline of history describing primitive life on the earth, states, but though the ocean and intertidal water already swarmed with life, the land above the high tide line was still, so far as we can guess, a stony wilderness without a trace of life. In the next chapter, he adds, wherever the shoreline ran, there was life, and that life went on in and by with water as its home, its medium, and its fundamental necessity. The ancients believed that the universal sperm proceeded from warm vapor, humid but fiery. The veiled Isis, whose very coverings represent vapor, is symbolic of this humidity, which is the carrier or vehicle for the sperm life of the sun, represented by a child in her arms. Because the sun, moon, and stars in setting appear to sink into the sea, and also because the water receives their rays into itself, the sea was believed to be the breeding ground for the sperm of living things. This sperm is generated from the combination of the influences of the celestial bodies. Hence, Isis is sometimes represented as pregnant. Frequently, the statue of Isis was accompanied by the figure of a large black and white ox. The ox represents either Osiris as Taurus, the bull of the Zodiac, or Apis, an animal sacred to Osiris because of its peculiar markings and colorings. Among the Egyptians, the bull was a beast of burden. Hence, the presence of the animal was a reminder of the labors patiently performed by nature, that all creatures may have life and health. Harpocrates, the god of silence, holding his fingers to his mouth, often accompanies the statue of Isis. He warns all to keep the secrets of the wise from those unfit to know them. The Druids of Britain and Gaul had a deep knowledge concerning the mysteries of Isis and worshipped her under the symbol of the moon. Godfrey Higgins considers it a mistake to regard Isis as synonymous with the moon. The moon was chosen for Isis because of its dominion over water. The Druids considered the sun to be the father and the moon the mother of all things. By means of these symbols, they worshipped universal nature. The figure of Isis is sometimes used to represent the occult and magical arts such as necromancy, invocation, sorcery, and thaumaturgy. In one of the myths concerning her, Isis is said to have conjured the invisible god of eternities, Ra, to tell her his secret and sacred name, which he did. This name is equivalent to the lost word of masonry. By means of this word, a magician can demand obedience from the invisible and superior deities. The priests of Isis became adepts in the use of the unseen forces of nature. They understand hypnotism, mesmerism, and similar practices long before the modern world dreamed of their existence. Plutarch describes the requisites of a follower of Isis in this manner. For as 'tis not the length of the beard or the coarseness of the habit which makes a philosopher, so neither will those frequent shavings or the mere wearing of a linen vestment constitute a votary of Isis. But he alone is a true servant or follower of this goddess, who, after he has heard and been made acquainted in a proper manner with the history of the actions of these gods, searches into the hidden truths which he concealed under them, and examines the whole by the dictates of reason and philosophy. During the Middle Ages, the troubadours of Central Europe preserved in song the legends of this Egyptian goddess. They composed sonnets to the most beautiful woman in all the world. Though few ever discovered her identity, she was Sophia, the Virgin of Wisdom, whom all the philosophers of the world have wooed. Isis represents the mystery of motherhood, which the ancients recognized as the most apparent proof of nature's omniscient wisdom and God's overshadowing power. To the modern seeker, she is the epitome of the great unknown, and only those who unveil her will be able to solve the mysteries of life, death, generation, and regeneration. Mummification of the Egyptian dead. Servius, commenting on Virgil's Aeneid, observes that the wise Egyptians took care to embalm their bodies and deposit them in catacombs in order that the soul might be preserved for a long time in connection with the body and might not soon be alienated. While the Romans, with an opposite design, committed the remains of their dead to the funeral pile, intending that the vital spark might immediately be restored to the general element or return to its pristine nature. from Pritchard's An Analysis of the Egyptian Mythology. No complete records are available which give the secret doctrine of the Egyptians concerning the relationship existing between the spirit or consciousness and the body which it inhabited. It is reasonably certain, however, that Pythagoras, who had been initiated in the Egyptian temples when he promulgated the doctrine of metempsychosis, restated in part at least the teachings of the Egyptian initiates. The popular supposition that the Egyptians mummified their dead in order to preserve the form for a physical resurrection is untenable in the light of modern knowledge regarding their philosophy of death. In the fourth book of On Abstinence from Animal Food, Porphyry describes an Egyptian custom of purifying the dead by removing the contents of the abdominal cavity, which they placed in a separate chest. He then reproduces the following oration, which had been translated out of the Egyptian tongue by Euphontes: O sovereign son, and all ye gods who impart life to men, receive me and deliver me to the eternal gods as a cohabitant. For I have always piously worshipped those divinities which were pointed out to me by my parents as long as I lived in this age, and have likewise always honored those who procreated my body. And with respect to other men, I have never slain anyone, nor defrauded anyone of what he deposited with me, nor have I committed any other atrocious deed. If therefore during my life I have acted erroneously by eating or drinking things which it is unlawful to eat or drink, I have not erred through myself, but through these, pointing to the chest which contained the viscera. The removal of the organs identified as the seat of the appetites was considered equivalent to the purification of the body from their evil influences. Osiris, king of the underworld. Osiris is often represented with the lower part of his body enclosed in a mummy case or wrapped about with funeral bandages. Man's spirit consists of three distinct parts, only one of which incarnates in physical form. The human body was considered to be a tomb or sepulchre of this incarnating spirit. Therefore, Osiris, a symbol of the incarnating ego, was represented with the lower half of his body mummified to indicate that he was the living spirit of man enclosed within the material form, symbolized by the mummy case. There is a romance between the active principle of God and the passive principle of nature. From the union of these two principles is produced the rational creation. Man is a composite creature. From his father, the active principle, he inherits his divine spirit, the fire of aspiration, that immortal part of himself which rises triumphant from the broken clay of mortality. That part which remains after the natural organisms have disintegrated or have been regenerated. From his mother, the passive principle, he inherits his body, that part over which the laws of nature have control. His humanity, his mortal personality, his appetites, his feelings, and his emotions. The Egyptians also believed that Osiris was the river Nile and that Isis, his sister wife, was the contiguous land which, when inundated by the river, bore fruit and harvest. The murky water of the Nile were believed to account for the blackness of Osiris, who was generally symbolized as being of ebony hue. So literally did the early Christians interpret their scriptures that they preserved the bodies of their dead by pickling them in salt water, so that on the day of resurrection, the spirit of the dead might re-enter a complete and perfectly preserved body. Believing that the incisions necessary to the embalming process and the removal of the internal organs would prevent the return of the spirit to its body, the Christians buried their dead without resorting to the more elaborate mummification methods employed by the Egyptian morticians. In his work on Egyptian magic, SSDD hazards the following speculation concerning the esoteric purposes behind the practice of mummification. There is every reason to suppose, he says, that only those who had received some grade of initiation were mummified, for it is certain that in the eyes of the Egyptians, mummification effectually prevented reincarnation. Reincarnation was necessary to imperfect souls, to those who had failed to pass the test of initiation. But for those who had the will and the capacity to enter the secret adytum, there was seldom necessity for that liberation of the soul, which is said to be effected by the destruction of the body. The body of the initiate was therefore preserved after death as a species of talisman or material basis for the manifestation of the soul upon earth. During the period of its inception, mummification was limited to the pharaoh and such other persons of royal rank as presumably partook of the attributes of the great Osiris, the divine mummified king of the Egyptian underworld. The sun, a universal deity. The adoration of the sun was one of the earliest and most natural forms of religious expression. Complex modern theologies are merely involvements and amplifications of this simple aboriginal belief. The primitive mind, recognizing the beneficent power of the solar orb, adored it as the proxy of the supreme deity. Concerning the origin of sun worship, Albert Pike makes the following concise statement in his Morals and Dogma. To them, Aboriginal peoples, he, the sun, was the innate fire of bodies, the fire of nature. Author of life, heat, and ignition, he was to them the efficient cause of all generation, for without him there was no movement, no existence, no form. He was to them immense, indivisible, imperishable, and everywhere present. It was their need of light and of his creative energy that was felt by all men, and nothing was more fearful to them than his absence. His beneficent influences caused his identification with the principle of good and the Brahma of the Hindus and Mithras of the Persians and Atham, Amun, Tha, and Osiris of the Egyptians, the Baal of the Chaldeans, the Adonai of the Phoenicians, the Adonis and Apollo of the Greeks became but personifications of the sun, the regenerating principle, image of that fecundity which perpetuates and rejuvenates the world's existence. Among all the nations of antiquity, altars, mounds, and temples were dedicated to the worship of the orb of day. The ruins of these sacred places yet remain, notable among them being the pyramids of Yucatan and Egypt, the snake mounds of the ancient Indians, the ziggurats of Babylon and Chaldea, the round towers of Ireland, and the massive rings of uncut stone in Britain and Normandy. The Tower of Babel, which according to the scriptures was built so that man might reach up to God, was probably an astronomical observatory. Many early priests and prophets, both pagan and Christian, were versed in astronomy and astrology. Their writings are best understood when read in the light of these ancient sciences. With the growth of man's knowledge of the constitution and periodicity of the heavenly bodies, astronomical principles and terminology were introduced into his religious systems. The tutelary gods were giving planetary thrones, the celestial bodies being named after the deities assigned to them. The fixed stars were divided into constellations, and through these constellations wandered the sun and its planets, the latter with their accompanying satellites. The solar trinity. The sun, as supreme among the celestial bodies, visible to the astronomers of antiquity, was assigned to the highest of the gods and became symbolic of the supreme authority of the Creator himself. From a deep philosophic consideration of the powers and principles of the sun has come the concept of the Trinity as it is understood in the world today. The tenet of a triune divinity is not peculiar to Christian or Mosaic theology, but forms a conspicuous part of the dogma of the greatest religions of both ancient and modern times. The Persians, Hindus, Babylonians, and Egyptians had their trinities. In every instance, these represented the threefold form of one supreme intelligence. In modern masonry, the deity is symbolized by an equilateral triangle, its three sides representing the primary manifestations of the Eternal One, who is himself represented as a tiny flame, called by the Hebrews Yod. Jacob Boehme, the Teutonic mystic, calls the Trinity the three witnesses by means of which the invisible is made known to the visible, tangible universe. The Lion of the Sun, from Maurice's Indian Antiquities. The sun rising over the back of the lion, or astrologically in the back of the lion, has always been considered symbolic of power and rulership. A symbol very similar to the one above appears on the flag of Persia, whose people have always been sun worshippers. Kings and emperors have frequently associated their terrestrial power with the celestial power of the solar orb, and have accepted the sun or one of its symbolic beasts or birds as their emblem. Witness the lion of the great Mogul and the eagles of Caesar and Napoleon. The origin of the Trinity is obvious to anyone who will observe the daily manifestations of the sun. This orb, being the symbol of all light, has three distinct phases: rising, midday, and setting. The philosophers therefore divided the life of all things into three distinct parts: growth, maturity, and decay. Between the twilight of dawn and the twilight of evening is the high noon of resplendent glory. God the Father, the creator of the world, is symbolized by the dawn. His color is blue because the sun rising in the morning is veiled in blue mist. God the Son, he illuminating one, sent to bear witness of his Father before all the worlds, is the celestial globe at noonday, radiant and magnificent, the maned Lion of Judah, the golden-haired Savior of the world. Yellow is his color, and his power is without end. God, the Holy Ghost, is the sunset phase, when the orb of day, robed in flaming red, rests for a moment upon the horizon line and then vanishes into the darkness of the night to wandering the lower worlds, and later rise again triumphant from the embrace of darkness. To the Egyptians, the sun was the symbol of immortality, for while it died each night, it rose again with each ensuing dawn. Not only has the sun this diurnal activity, but it also has the annual pilgrimage, during which time it passes successfully through the 12 celestial houses of the heavens, remaining in each for 30 days. Added to these, it has a third path of travel, which is called the procession of the Equinoxes, in which it retrogrades around the zodiac through the 12 signs at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. Concerning the annual passage of the sun through the 12 houses of the heavens, Robert Hewitt Brown, 32 degree, makes the following statement. The sun, as he pursued his way among these living creatures of the zodiac, was said in allegorical language either to assume the nature of or to triumph over the sign he entered. The sun thus became a bull in Taurus and was worshipped as such by the Egyptians under the name of Apis, and by the Assyrians as Baal, or Bull. In Leo, the sun became a lion slayer, Hercules, and an archer in Sagittarius. In Pisces, the fishes, he was a fish, Dagon, or Vishnu, the fish god of the Philistines and Hindus. A careful analysis of the religious systems of pagandom uncovers much evidence of the fact that its priests served the solar energy and that their supreme deity was in every case this divine light personified. Godfrey Higgins, after 30 years of inquiry into the origin of religious beliefs, is of the opinion that all the gods of antiquity resolved themselves into the solar fire, sometimes itself as God, or sometimes an emblem or Shekinah of that higher principle known by the name of the creative being or God. The Egyptian priests in many of their ceremonies wore the skins of lions, which were symbols of the solar orb, owing to the fact that the sun is exalted, dignified, and most fortunately placed in the constellation of Leo, which he rules and which was at one time the keystone of the celestial arch. Again, Hercules is the solar deity, for as this mighty hunter performed his 12 labors, so the sun, in traversing the 12 houses of the zodiacal band, performs during his pilgrimage 12 essential and benevolent labors for the human race and for nature in general. Hercules, like the Egyptian priest, wore the skin of a lion for a girdle. Samson, the Hebrew hero, as his name implies, is also a solar deity. His fight with the Nubian lion, his battles with the Philistines, who represent the powers of darkness, and his memorable feat of carrying off the gates of Gaza all refer to aspects of solar activity. Many of the ancient peoples had more than one solar deity. In fact, all of the gods and goddesses were supposed to partake, in part at least, of the sun's effulgence. The winged globe of Egypt. This symbol, which appears over the pylons or gates of many Egyptian palaces and temples, is emblematic of the three persons of the Egyptian Trinity. The wings, the serpents, and the solar orb are the insignia of Ammon, Ra, and Osiris. The golden ornaments used by the priestcraft or the various world religions are again a subtle reference to the solar energy, as are also the crowns of kings. In ancient times, crowns had a number of points extending outward like the rays of the sun, but modern conventionalism has in many cases either removed the points or else bent them inward, gathered them together, and placed an orb or cross upon the point where they meet. Many of the ancient prophets, philosophers, and dignitaries carried a scepter, the upper end of which bore a representation of the solar globe surrounded by emanating rays. All the kingdoms of earth were but copies of the kingdoms of heaven, and the kingdoms of heaven were best symbolized by the solar kingdom, in which the sun was the supreme ruler, the planets his privy council, and all nature the subjects of his empire. Many deities have been associated with the sun. The Greeks believed that Apollo, Bacchus, Dionysus, Sabazius, Hercules, Jason, Ulysses, Zeus, Uranus, and Vulcan partook of either the visible or invisible attributes of the sun. The Norwegians regarded Balder the Beautiful as a solar deity, and Odin is often connected with the celestial orb, especially because of his one eye. Among the Egyptians, Osiris, Ra, Anubis, Hermes, and even the mysterious Ammon himself had points of resemblance with the solar disk. Isis was the mother of the sun, and even Typhon, the destroyer, was supposed to be a form of solar energy. The Egyptian sun myth finally centered around the person of a mysterious deity called Serapis. The two Central American deities, Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl, while often associated with the winds, were also undoubtedly solar gods. In Masonry, the sun has many symbols. One expression of the solar energy is Solomon, whose name Sol Om On is the name for the supreme light in 3 different languages. Hiram Abip, the Hiram of the Chaldees, is also a solar deity, and the story of his attack and murder by the Ruthians with its solar interpretation will be found in the chapter The Hiramic Legend. A striking example of the important part which the sun plays in the symbols and rituals of Freemasonry is given by George Oliver D.D. in his Dictionary of Symbolical Masonry as follows. The sun rises in the east, and in the east is the place for the worshipful master. As the sun is the source of all light and warmth, so should the worshipful master enliven and warm the brethren to their work. Among the ancient Egyptians, the sun was the symbol of divine providence. The hierophants of the mysteries were adorned with many insignia emblematic of solar power. The sunburst of gilt embroidery on the back of the vestments of the Catholic priesthood signify that the priest is also an emissary and representative of Sol Invictus. Christianity and the sun. For reasons which they doubtless considered sufficient, those who chronicled the life and acts of Jesus found it advisable to metamorphose him into a solar deity. The historical Jesus was forgotten. Nearly all the salient incidents recorded in the 4 Gospels have their correlations in the movements, phases, or functions of the heavenly bodies. Among other allegories borrowed by Christianity from pagan antiquity is the story of the beautiful blue-eyed sun god, with his golden hair falling upon his shoulders, robed from head to foot in spotless white, and carrying in his arms the Lamb of God, symbolic of the vernal equinox. This handsome youth is composite of Apollo, Osiris, Orpheus, Mithras, and Bacchus, for he has certain characteristics in common with each of these pagan deities. The philosophers of Greece and Egypt divided the life of the sun during the year into 4 parts. Therefore, they symbolized the solar man by 4 different figures. When he was born in the winter solstice, the sun god was symbolized as a dependent infant who in some mysterious manner had managed to escape the powers of darkness seeking to destroy him while he was still in the cradle of winter. The sun, being weak at this season of the year, had no golden rays or locks of hair, but the survival of the light through the darkness of winter was symbolized by one tiny hair, which alone adorned the head of the celestial child. As the birth of the sun took place in Capricorn, it was often represented as being suckled by a goat. At the vernal equinox, the sun had grown to be a beautiful youth. His golden hair hung in ringlets on his shoulders, and his light, as Schiller said, extended to all parts of infinity. At the summer solstice, the sun became a strong man, heavily bearded, who, in the prime of maturity, symbolized the fact that nature at this period of the year is strongest and most fecund. At the autumnal equinox, the sun was pictured as an aged man, shuffling along with bended back and whitened locks into the oblivion of winter darkness. Thus, 12 months were assigned to the sun as the length of its life. During this period, it circled the 12 signs of the zodiac in a magnificent triumphal march. When fall came, it entered like Samson into the house of Delilah or Virgo, where its rays were cut off and it lost its strength. In Masonry, the cruel winter months are symbolized by three murderers who sought to destroy the God of light and truth. The coming of the sun was hailed with joy. The time of its departure was viewed as a period to be set aside for sorrow and unhappiness. This glorious, radiant orb of day, the true light, which lighteth every man who cometh into the world, the supreme benefactor, who raised all things from the dead, who fed the hungry multitudes, who stilled the tempest, who after dying rose again and restored all things to life. This supreme spirit of humanitarianism and philanthropy is known to Christendom as Christ, the Redeemer of worlds, the only begotten of the Father, the Word made flesh, and the hope of glory. The birthday of the sun. The pagans set aside the 25th of December as the birthday of the solar man. They rejoiced, feasted, gathered in processions, and made offerings in the temples. The darkness of winter was over, and the glorious sun of light was returning to the northern hemisphere. With his last effort, the old sun god had torn down the house of the Philistines, the spirits of darkness, and had cleared the way for the new sun who was born that day from the depths of the earth amidst the symbolic beasts of the lower world. Concerning this season of celebration, an anonymous master of arts of Balliol College, Oxford, in his scholarly treatise, Mankind, Their Origin and Destiny, says, the Romans also had their solar festival and their games of the circus in honor of the birth of the god of day. It took place the 8th day before the calends of January, that is, on December 25th. Servius, in his commentary on verse 720 of the 7th book of the Aeneid, in which Virgil speaks of the new sun, says that, properly speaking, the sun is new on the 8th of the calends of January, that is December 25th. In the time of Leo, the Leo Serm de Native Dom, page 148, some of the fathers of the church said that what rendered the festival of Christmas venerable was less the birth of Jesus Christ than the return and, as they expressed it, the new birth of the sun. It was on the same day that the birth of the invincible sun, Natalis Solis Invicti, was celebrated at Rome, as can be seen in the Roman calendars published in the reign of Constantine and of Julian. This epithet, Invictus, is the same as the Persians gave to this same god, whom they worshipped by the name of Mithra, and whom they caused to be born in a grotto, just as he is represented as being born in a stable under the name of Christ by the Christians. Concerning the Catholic feast of the Assumption and its parallel in astronomy, the same author adds, at the end of 8 months, when the sun god, having increased, traverses the 8th sign, he absorbs the celestial virgin in his fiery course, and she disappears in the midst of the luminous rays and the glory of her sun. This phenomenon, which takes place every year about the middle of August, gave rise to a festival which still exists, and in which it is supposed that the Mother of Christ, laying aside her earthly life, is associated with the glory of her Son and is placed at his side in the heavens. The Roman calendar of Columella marks the death of disappearance of Virgo at this period. The sun, he says, passes into Virgo on the 13th day before the calends of September. This is where the Catholics place the Feast of the Assumption, or the reunion of the Virgin to her Son. This feast was formerly called the Feast of the Passage of the Virgin, and in the Library of the Fathers, we have an account of the passage of the Blessed Virgin. The ancient Greeks and Romans fixed the Assumption of Astrea who is also this same virgin on that day. This virgin mother giving birth to the sun god, which Christianity has so faithfully preserved, is a reminder of the inscription concerning her Egyptian prototype, Isis, which appeared on the temple of Sais. The fruit which I have brought forth is the sun. While the virgin was associated with the moon by the early pagans, there is no doubt that they also understood her position as a constellation in the heavens, for nearly all the peoples of antiquity credit her as being the mother of the sun. And they realized that although the moon could not occupy that position, the sign of Virgo could and did give birth to the sun out of her side on the 25th day of December. Albertus Magnus states, "We know that the sign of the celestial virgin rose over the horizon at the moment at which we fix the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ. Among certain of the Arabian and Persian astronomers, the three stars forming the sword belt of Orion were called the Magi, who came to pay homage to the young sun god. The author of Mankind, Their Origin and Destiny, contributes the following additional information. In Cancer, which had risen to the meridian at midnight, is the constellation of the stable and of the ass. The ancients called it Precip Jovis. In the north, the stars of the bear are seen, called by the Arabians Martha and Mary, and also the coffin of Lazarus. Thus, the esotericism of pagandom was embodied in Christianity, although its keys are lost. The Christian church blindly follows ancient customs and, when asked for a reason, gives superficial and unsatisfactory explanations, either forgetting or ignoring the indisputable fact that each religion is based upon the secret doctrines of its predecessor. The three suns. The solar orb, like the nature of man, was divided by the ancient sages into three separate bodies. According to the mystics, there are three suns in each system, analogous to the three centers of life in each individual constitution. These are called three lights: the spiritual sun, the intellectual or solar sun, and the material sun, now symbolized in Freemasonry by three candles. The spiritual sun manifests the power of God the Father. The solar sun radiates the life of God the Son, and the material sun is the vehicle of manifestation for God the Holy Spirit. Man's nature was divided by the mystics into three distinct parts: spirit, soul, and body. His physical body was unfolded and vitalized by the material sun. His spiritual nature was illuminated by the spiritual sun, and his intellectual nature was redeemed by the true light of grace, the solar sun. The alignment of these three globes in the heavens was one explanation offered for the peculiar fact that the orbits of the planets are not circular but elliptical. The three suns from Lily's astrological predictions for 1648, 49, and 50. The following description of this phenomenon appears in a letter written by Jeremiah Shakerley in Lancashire, March 4th, 1648. On Monday, the 28th of February last, there arose with the sun two paralleli. On either side, one, their distance from him was by estimation about 10 degrees. They continued still of the same distance from the zenith, or height above the horizon, that the sun did. And from the parts averse to the sun, there seemed to issue out certain bright rays, not unlike those which the sun sendeth from behind a cloud, but brighter. The parts of these parallel which were toward the sun were of a mixed color, wherein green and red were most predominant. A little above them was a thin rainbow, scarcely discernible, of a bright color, with the concave towards the sun, and the ends thereof seeming to touch the parallel. Above that, in a clear diaphanous air, appeared another conspicuous rainbow, beautified with diverse colors. It was as near as I could discern to the zenith. It seemed of something a lesser radius than the other, they being back to back, yet a pretty way between. At or near the apparent time of the full moon, they vanished, leaving abundance of terror and amazement in those that saw them. The pagan priests always considered the solar system as a grand man and drew their analogy of these three centers of activity from the three main centers of life in the human body: the brain, the heart, and the generative system. The transfiguration of Jesus describes three tabernacles, the largest being in the center, the heart, and a smaller one on either side, the brain and the generative system. It is possible that the philosophical hypothesis of the existence of the three suns is based upon a peculiar natural phenomenon which has occurred many times in history. In the 51st year after Christ, three suns were seen at once in the sky, and also in the 66th year. In the 69th year, two suns were seen together. According to William Lilly, between the years 1156 and 1648, 20 similar occurrences were recorded. Recognizing the sun as the supreme benefactor of the material world, Hermetists believed that there was a spiritual sun which ministered to the needs of the invisible and divine part of nature, human and universal. Anent this subject, the great Paracelsus wrote, "There is an earthly sun, which is the cause of all heat, and all who are able to see may see the sun, and those who are blind and cannot see him may feel his heat. There is an eternal sun, which is the source of all wisdom, and those whose spiritual senses have awakened to life will see that sun and be conscious of his existence. But those who have not attained spiritual consciousness may yet feel his power by an inner faculty, which is called intuition." Certain Rosicrucian scholars have given special appellations to these three phases of the sun. The spiritual sun they called Vulcan, the solar and intellectual sun, Christ and Lucifer respectively, and the material sun, the Jewish demiurgus Jehovah. Lucifer here represents the intellectual mind without the illumination of the spiritual mind. Therefore, it is the false light. The false light is finally overcome and redeemed by the true light of the soul, called the second Logos, or Christ. The secret processes by which the Luciferian intellect is transmuted into the Christly intellect constitute one of the great secrets of alchemy, and are symbolized by the process of transmuting base metals into gold. In the rare treatise, The Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians, Franz Hartmann defines the sun alchemically as the symbol of wisdom, the center of power or heart of things. The sun is a center of energy and a storehouse of power. Each living being contains within itself a center of life which may grow to be a sun. In the heart of the regenerated, the divine power, stimulated by the light of the Logos, grows into a sun which illuminates his mind. In a note, the same author amplifies his description by adding, "The terrestrial sun is the image or reflection of the invisible celestial sun. The former is the realm of spirit, what the latter is in the realm of matter, but the latter receives its power from the former." In the majority of cases, the religions of antiquity agree that the material visible sun was a reflector rather than a source of power. The sun was sometimes represented as a shield carried on the arm of the sun god, as for example, Frey, the Scandinavian solar deity. This sun reflected the light of the invisible spiritual sun, which was the true source of life, light, and truth. The physical nature of the universe is receptive. It is a realm of effects. The invisible causes of these effects belong to the spiritual world. Hence, the spiritual world is the sphere of causation. The material world is the sphere of effects, while the intellectual or soul world is the sphere of mediation. Thus, Christ, the personified higher intellect and soul nature, is called the mediator, who, by virtue of his position and power, says, "No man cometh to the Father but by me." What the sun is to the solar system, the spirit is to the bodies of man, for his natures, organs, and functions are planets surrounding the central life or sun and living upon its emanations. The solar power in man is divided into three parts, which are termed the threefold human spirit of man. All three of these spiritual natures are said to be radiant and transcendent. United, they form the divinity in man. Man's threefold lower nature, consisting of his physical organism, his emotional nature, and his mental faculties, reflects the light of his threefold divinity and bears witness of it in the physical world. Man's three bodies are symbolized by an upright triangle, his threefold spiritual nature by an inverted triangle. These two triangles, when united in the form of a six-pointed star, were called by the Jews the Star of David, the signet of Solomon, and are more commonly known today as the Star of Zion. These triangles symbolize the spiritual and material universes linked together in the constitution of the human creature, who partakes of both nature and divinity. Man's animal nature partakes of the earth, his divine nature of the heavens, his human nature of the mediator. The celestial inhabitants of the sun. The Rosicrucians and the Illuminati, describing the angels, archangels, and other celestial creatures, declared that they resembled small suns, being centers of radiant energy surrounded by streamers of relic force. From these outpouring streamers of force is derived the popular belief that angels have wings. These wings are corona-like fans of light, by means of which the celestial creatures propel themselves through the subtle essences of the superphysical worlds. True mystics are unanimous in their denial of the theory that the angels and archangels are human in form, as so often pictured. A human figure would be utterly useless in the ethereal substances through which they manifest. Science has long debated the probability of the other planars being inhabited, or planets being inhabited. Objections to the idea are based upon the argument that creatures with human organisms could not possibly exist in the environments of Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune. This argument fails to take into account nature's universal law of adjustment to environment. The ancients asserted that life originated from the sun, and that everything, when bathed in the light of the solar orb, was capable of absorbing the solar life elements and later radiating them as flora and fauna. One philosophical concept regarded the sun as a parent and the planars as embryos still connected to the solar body by means of ethereal umbilical cords, which served as channels to convey life and nourishment to the planets. Some secret orders have taught that the sun was inhabited by a race of creatures with bodies composed of a radiant spiritual ether, not unlike in its constituency, the actual glowing ball of the sun itself. The solar heat had no harmful effect upon them because their organisms were sufficiently refined and sensitized to harmonize with the sun's tremendous vibratory rate. These creatures resemble miniature suns, being a little larger than a dinner plate in size. Although some of the more powerful are considerably larger. Their color is the golden white light of the sun, and from them emanate four streamers of vril. These streamers are often of great length and are in constant motion. A peculiar palpitation is to be noted throughout the structure of the globe and is communicated in the form of ripples to the emanating streamers. The greatest and most luminous of these spheres is the Archangel Michael, and the entire order of solar life, which resemble him and dwell upon the sun, are called by modern Christians the archangels or the spirits of the light. Surya, the regent of the sun, from Moore's Hindu pantheon. Moore describes this figure as follows: the cast in 9 inches in height, representing the glorious god of day, holding the attributes of Vishnu, seated on a seven-headed serpent. His car drawn by a seven-headed horse, driven by the legless Arun, a personification of the dawn or aurora. The sun in alchemical symbology. Gold is the metal of the sun and has been considered by many as crystallized sunlight. When gold is mentioned in alchemical tracts, it may be either the metal itself or the celestial orb, which is the source or spirit of gold. Sulfur, because of its fiery nature, was also associated with the sun. As gold was the symbol of spirit and the base metals represented man's lower nature, certain alchemists were called miners and were pictured with picks and shovels digging into the earth in search of the precious metal. Those finer traits of character buried in the earthiness of materiality and ignorance. The diamond concealed in the heart of the black carbon illustrated the same principle. The Illuminati used a pearl hidden in the shell of an oyster at the bottom of the sea to signify spiritual powers. Thus, the seeker after truth became a pearl fisher. He descended into the sea of material illusion in search of understanding, termed by the initiates the pearl of great price. When the alchemists stated that every animate and inanimate thing in the universe contained the seeds of gold, they meant that even the grains of sand possessed a spiritual nature, for gold was the spirit of all things. Concerning these seeds of spiritual gold, the following Rosicrucian axiom is significant. A seed is useless and impotent unless it is put in its appropriate matrix. Franz Hartmann comments on this axiom with these illuminating words. A soul cannot develop and progress without an appropriate body, because it is the physical body that furnishes the material for its development. The purpose of alchemy was not to make something out of nothing, but rather to fertilize and nurture the seed which was already present. It processes did not actually create gold, but rather made the ever-present seed of gold grow and flourish. Everything which exists has a spirit, the seed of divinity within itself, and regeneration is not the process of attempting to place something where it previously had not existed. Regeneration actually means the unfoldment of the omnipresent divinity in man, that this divinity may shine forth as a sun and illume all with whom it comes in contact. The midnight sun. A Apuleius said when describing his initiation, vid ante, at midnight I saw the sun shining with a splendid light. The midnight sun was also part of the mystery of alchemy. It symbolized the spirit in man shining through the darkness of his human organisms. It also referred to the spiritual sun in the solar system, which the mystic could see, as well as midnight as at high noon. The material earth being powerless to obstruct the rays of this divine orb. The mysterious lights which illuminated the temples of the Egyptian mysteries during the nocturnal hours were said by some to the reflections of the spiritual sun gathered by the magical powers of the priests. The weird light seen 10 miles below the surface of the earth by I Am the Man in that remarkable Masonic allegory at Adorpha, Aphrodite spelled backward, may well refer to the mysterious midnight sun of the ancient rites. Primitive conceptions concerning the warfare between the principles of good and evil were often based upon the alternations of day and night. During the Middle Ages, the practices of black magic were confined to the nocturnal hours, and those who served the spirit of evil were called black magicians, while those who served the spirit of God were called white magicians. Black and white were associated respectively with night and day, and the endless conflict of light and shadow is alluded to many times in the mythologies of various peoples. The Egyptian demon Typhon was symbolized as part crocodile and part hog because these animals are gross and earthy in both appearance and temperament. Since the world began, living things have feared the darkness. Those few creatures who use it as a shield for their maneuvers were usually connected with the spirit of evil. Consequently, cats, bats, toads, and owls are associated with witchcraft. In certain parts of Europe, it is still believed that at night black magicians assume the bodies of wolves and roam around destroying. From this notion originated the stories of the werewolves. Serpents, because they lived in the earth, were associated with the spirit of darkness. As the battle between good and evil centers around the use of the generative forces of nature, winged serpents represent the regeneration of the animal nature of man, or those great ones in whom this regeneration is complete. Among the Egyptians, the sun's rays are often shown ending in human hands. Masons will find a connection between these hands and the well-known paw of the lion, which raises all things to life with its grip. Solar colors. The theory so long held of 3 primary and 4 secondary colors is purely exoteric. For since the earliest periods, it has been known that there are 7 and not 3 primary colors, the human eye being capable of estimating only 3 of them. Thus, although green can be made by combining blue and yellow, there is also a true or primary green, which is not a compound. This can be proved by breaking up the spectrum with a prism. Helmholtz found that the so-called secondary colors of the spectrum could not be broken up into their supposed primary colors. Thus, the orange of the spectrum, if passed through a second prism, does not break up into red and yellow, but remains orange. Consciousness, intelligence, and force are fittingly symbolized by the colors blue, yellow, and red. The therapeutic effects of the colors, moreover, are in harmony with this concept, for blue is a fine, soothing electrical color, yellow a vitalizing and refining color, and red an agitating and heat-giving color. It has also been demonstrated that minerals and plants affect the human consumption according to their colors. Thus, a yellow flower generally yields a medicine that affects the constitution in a manner similar to yellow light or the musical tone mi. An orange flower will also, in a manner similar to orange-like and being one of the so-called secondary colors, corresponds either to the tone ray or to the chord of do and mi. The ancients conceived the spirit of man to correspond with the color blue, the mind with yellow, and the body with red. Heaven is therefore blue, earth yellow, and hell, or the underworld, red. The fiery condition of the inferno merely symbolizes the nature of the sphere or plane of force of which it is composed. In the Greek mysteries, the irrational sphere was also considered as red, for it represented that condition in which the consciousness is enslaved by the lust and passions of the lower nature. In India, certain of the gods, usually attributes of Vishnu, are depicted with blue skin to signify their divine and supermundane constitution. According to esoteric philosophy, blue is the true and sacred color of the sun. The apparent orange-yellow shade of this orb is the result of its rays being immersed in the substances of the illusionary world. In the original symbolism of the Christian church, colors were of first importance and their use was regulated according to carefully prepared rules. Since the Middle Ages, however, the carelessness with which colors have been employed has resulted in the loss of their deeper emblematic meanings. In its primary aspect, white or silver signified life, purity, innocence, joy, and light. Red, the suffering and death of Christ and his saints, and also divine love, blood, and warfare or suffering. Blue, the heavenly sphere and the states of godliness and contemplation. Yellow or gold, glory, fruitfulness, and goodness. Green, fecundity, youthfulness, and prosperity. Violet, humility, deep affection, and sorrow. Black, death, destruction, and humiliation. In early church art, the colors of robes and ornaments also revealed whether a saint had been martyred, as well as the character of the work that he had done to deserve canonization. In addition to the colors of the spectrum, there are a vast number of vibratory color waves, some too low and others too high to be registered by the human optical apparatus. It is appalling to contemplate man's colossal ignorance concerning these vistas of abstract space. As in the past, man explored unknown continents, so in the future, armed with curious implements fashioned for the purpose, he will explore these little-known fastnesses of light, color, sound, and consciousness. The solar face. From Montfaucon's Antiquities. The corona of the sun is here shown in the form of a lion's mane. This is a subtle reminder of the fact that at one time the solar solstice took place in the sign of Leo, the celestial lion. The zodiac and its signs. It is difficult for this age to estimate correctly the profound effect produced upon the religions, philosophies, and sciences of antiquity by the study of the planets, luminaries, and constellations. Not without adequate reason were the Magi of Persia called the stargazers. The Egyptians were honored with a special appellation because of their proficiency in computing the power and motion of the heavenly bodies and their effect upon the destinies of nations and individuals. Ruins of primitive astronomical observatories have been discovered in all parts of the world, although in many cases modern archaeologists are unaware of the true purpose for which these structures were erected. While the telescope was unknown to ancient astronomers, they made many remarkable calculations with instruments cut from blocks of granite or pounded from sheets of brass and copper. In India, such instruments are still in use and they possess a high degree of accuracy. In Jaipur, Rajputana, India, an observatory consisting largely of immense stone sundials is still in operation. The famous Chinese observatory on the wall of Peking consists of immense bronze instruments, including a telescope in the form of a hollow tube without lenses. The pagans looked upon the stars as living things capable of influencing the destinies of individuals, nations, and races. That the early Jewish patriarchs believed that the celestial bodies participated in the affairs of men is evident to any student of biblical literature, as, for example, in the book of Judges. They fought from heaven. Even the stars in their courses fought against Sisera. The Chaldeans, Phoenicians, Egyptians, Persians, Hindus, and Chinese all had zodiacs that were much alike in general character, and different authorities have credited each of these nations with being the cradle of astrology and astronomy. The Central and North American Indians also had an understanding of the zodiac, but the patterns and numbers of the signs differed in many details from those of the Eastern Hemisphere. The word zodiac is derived from the Greek zodiakos, which means a circle of animals, or, as some believe, little animals. It is the name given by the old pagan astronomers to a band of fixed stars about 16 degrees wide, apparently encircling the Earth. Robert Hewitt Brown, 32 degree, states that the Greek word zodiakos comes from zoon, meaning an animal. He adds this latter word is compounded directly from the primitive Egyptian radicals zo, life, and on, a being. The Greeks and later other peoples influenced by their culture divided the band of the zodiac into 12 sections, each being 16 degrees in width and 30 degrees in length. These divisions were called the houses of the zodiac. The sun, during its annual pilgrimage, passed through each of these in turn. Imaginary creatures were traced in the star groups bounded by these rectangles. And because most of them were animal or part animal in form, they later became known as the constellations or signs of the zodiac. There is a popular theory concerning the origin of the zodiacal creatures to the effect that they were products of the imagination of shepherds who, watching their flocks at night, occupied their minds by tracing the forms of animals and birds in the heavens. This theory is untenable unless the shepherds be regarded as the shepherd priest of antiquity. It is unlikely that the zodiacal signs were derived from the star groups which they now represent. It is far more probable that the creatures assigned to the 12 houses are symbolic of the qualities and intensity of the sun's power while it occupies different parts of the zodiacal belt. On this subject, Richard Payne Knight writes, the emblematical meaning which certain animals were employed to signify was only some particular property generalized, and therefore might easily be invented or discovered by the natural operation of the mind. But the collection of stars named after certain animals have no resemblance whatsoever to these animals, which are therefore merely signs of convention adopted to distinguish certain portions of the heavens, which were probably consecrated to those particular personified attributes which they respectively represented. The symbolical language of ancient art and mythology. Some authorities are of the opinion that the zodiac was originally divided into 10 instead of 12 houses or solar mansions. In early times, there were two separate standards, one solar and the other lunar, used for the measurement of the months, years, and seasons. The solar year was composed of 10 months or 36 days each, and 5 days sacred to the gods. The lunar year consisted of 13 months of 28 days each, with 1 day left over. The solar zodiac at that time consisted often houses of 36 degrees each. The first 6 signs of the zodiac of 12 signs were regarded as benevolent because the sun occupied them while traversing the northern hemisphere. The 6,000 years during which, according to the Persians, Ahura Mazda ruled his universe in harmony and peace were symbolic of these 6 signs. The second 6 were considered malevolent because while the sun was traveling the southern hemisphere, it was winter with the Greeks, Egyptians, and Persians. Therefore, these 6 months, symbolic of the 6,000 years of misery and suffering caused by the evil genius of the Persians, Ahriman, who sought to overthrow the power of Ahura Mazda. Be right back. Okay. So those who hold the opinion that before its revision by the Greeks, the zodiac consisted of only 10 signs, adduce evidence to show that Libra, the scales, was inserted into the zodiac by dividing the constellation of Virgo, Scorpio at that time, one sign, into 2 parts, thus establishing the balance at the point of equilibrium between the ascending northern and the descending southern signs. See the Rosicrucians, Their Rites and Mysteries by Hargrave Jennings. On this subject, Isaac Meyer states, we think that the zodiacal constellations were first 10 and represented an immense androgenic man or deity. Subsequently, this was changed, resulting in Scorpio and Virgo, and making 11. After this, from Scorpio Libra, the balance was taken, making the present 12. The Kabbalah. Chart showing the relationship between the human body and the exterior universe. From Kircher's Oedipus Egyptiacus. The ornamental border contains groups of names of animal, mineral, and vegetable substances. Their relationship to corresponding parts of the human body is shown by the dotted lines. The words in capital letters on the dotted lines indicate to what corporeal member, organ, or disease the herb or other substance is related. The favorable positions in relation to the time of year are shown by the signs of the zodiac, each house of which is divided by crosses into its 3 decans. This influence is further emphasized by the series of planetary signs placed on either side of the figure. Each year, the sun passes entirely around the zodiac and returns to the point from which it started, the vernal equinox. And each year it falls just a little short of making the complete circle of the heavens in the allotted period of time. As a result, it crosses the equator just a little behind the spot in the zodiacal sign where it crossed the previous year. Each sign of the zodiac consists of 30 degrees, and as the sun loses about 1 degree every 72 years, it regresses through one entire constellation or sign in approximately 2,160 years, and through the entire zodiac in about 25,920 years. Authorities disagree concerning these figures. This retrograde motion is called the precession of the equinoxes. This means that in the course of about 25,920 years, which constitute one great solar or platonic year, each one of the 12 constellations occupies a position at the vernal equinox for nearly 2,160 years, then gives place to the previous sign. Among the ancients, the sign was always symbolized by the figure and nature of the constellation through which it passed at the vernal equinox. For nearly the past 2,000 years, the sun has crossed the equator at the vernal equinox in the constellation of Pisces, the two fishes. For the 2,160 years before that, it crossed the constellation of Aries, the ram. Prior to that, the vernal equinox was in the sign of Taurus, the bull. It is probable that the form of the bull and the bull's proclivities were assigned to this constellation because the bull was used by the ancients to plow the fields, and the season set aside for plowing and furrowing corresponded to the time at which the sun reached the segment of the heavens named Taurus. Albert Pike describes the reference which the Persians felt for this sign and the method of astrological symbolism in vogue among them thus. In Zoroaster's cave of initiation, the sun and planets were represented overhead in gems of gold, as was also the zodiac. The sun appeared emerging from the back of Taurus. In the constellation of the bull are also to be found the seven sisters, the sacred Pleiades, famous to Freemasonry as the seven stars at the upper end of the sacred ladder. In ancient Egypt, it was during this period, when the vernal equinox was in the sign of Taurus, that the bull Apis was sacred to the sun god, who was worshipped through the animal equivalent of the celestial sign, which he had impregnated with his presence at the time of its crossing into the northern hemisphere. This is the meaning of an ancient saying that the celestial bull broke the egg of the year with his horns. Samson Arnold Mackey, in his mythological astronomy of the ancients demonstrated, makes note of two very interesting points concerning the bull in Egyptian symbolism. Mr. Mackey is of the opinion that the motion of the earth that we know as the alternation of the poles has resulted in a great change of relative position of the equator and the zodiacal band. He believes that originally the band of the zodiac was at right angles to the equator, with the sign of Cancer opposite the North Pole and the sign of Capricorn opposite the South Pole. It is possible that the Orphic symbol of the serpent twisted around the egg attempts to show the motion of the sun in relation to the earth under such conditions. Mr. Mackey advances the labyrinth of Crete, the name Arbraxas, and the magic formula abracadabra, among other things, to substantiate his theory. Concerning abracadabra, he states, but the slow progressive disappearance of the bull is most happily commemorated in the vanishing series of letters so emphatically expressive of the great astronomical fact. For abracadabra is the bull, the only bull. The ancient sentence split into its component parts stands thus: abracadabra, or Aber the bull, Akkad the only. Akkad is one of the names of the sun. given him in consequence of his shining alone. He is the only star to be seen when he is seen. The remaining Abra makes the whole to be the bull, the only bull, while the repetition of the name, omitting a letter till all is gone, is the most simple yet the most satisfactory method that could have been devised to preserve the memory of the fact. And the name of Serapis or Serapis given to the bull at the above ceremony puts it beyond all doubt. This word, abracadabra, disappears in 11 decreasing stages, as in the figure. And what is very remarkable, a body with 3 heads is folded up by a serpent with 11 coils and placed by Serapis, and the 11 bulbs of the serpent form a triangle similar to that formed by the 11 diminishing lines of the abracadabra. The equinoxes and solstices. The plane of the zodiac intersects the celestial equator at an angle of approximately 23 degrees and 28 inches. The 2 points of intersection, A and B, are called the equinoxes. Nearly every religion of the world shows traces of astrological influence. The Old Testament of the Jews, its writings overshadowed by Egyptian culture, is a mass of astrological and astronomical allegories. Nearly all the mythology of Greece and Rome may be traced in star groups. Some writers of the opinion that the original 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet were derived from groups of stars. And that the starry handwriting on the wall of the heavens referred to words spelled out with fixed stars for consonants and the planets or luminaries for vowels. These, coming into ever different combinations, spelt words which, when properly read, foretold future events. As the zodiacal band marks the pathway of the sun through the constellations, it results in the phenomena of the seasons. The ancient systems of measuring the year were based upon the equinoxes and the solstices. The year always began with the vernal equinox, celebrated March 21st, with rejoicing to mark the moment when the sun crossed the equator northward up the zodiacal arc. The summer solstice was celebrated when the sun reached its most northerly position. And the day appointed was June 21st. After that time, the sun began to descend toward the equator, which it recrossed southbound at the autumnal equinox, September 21st. The sun reached its most southerly position at the winter solstice, 12/21, or December 21. 4 of the signs of the zodiac have been permanently dedicated to the equinoxes and the solstices, and while the signs no longer correspond with the ancient constellations to which they were assigned and from which they secured their names, they are accepted by modern astronomers as a basis of calculation. The vernal equinox is therefore said to occur in the constellation of Aries. The ram. It is fitting that all beasts of ram should be placed at the head of the heavenly flock, forming the zodiacal band. Centuries before the Christian era, the pagans revered this constellation, Godfrey Higgins state. This constellation was called the Lamb of God. He was also called the Savior and was said to save mankind from their sins. He was also honored with the appellation of Dominus, or Lord. He was called the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sins of the world. The devotees addressing him in their litany constantly repeated the words, O Lamb of God, that taketh away the sin of the world, have mercy upon us, grant us thy peace. Therefore, the Lamb of God is a title given to the sun, who is said to be reborn every year in the northern hemisphere in the sign of the ram, although due to the existing discrepancy between the signs of the zodiac and the actual star groups, it actually rises in the sign of Pisces. The summer solstice is regarded as occurring in Cancer, the crab, which the Egyptians called the scarab, a beetle of the family Lamelicorns, the head of the insect kingdom, and sacred to the Egyptians as the symbol of eternal life. It is evident that the constellation of the crab is represented by this peculiar creature because the sun, after passing through this house, proceeds to walk backwards or descend the zodiacal arc. Cancer is the symbol of generation, for it is the house of the moon, the great mother of all things and the patroness of the life forces of nature. Diana, the moon goddess of the Greeks, is called the mother of the world. Concerning the worship of the feminine or maternal principle, Richard Payne Knight writes, by attracting or heaving the waters of the ocean, she naturally appeared to be the sovereign of humidity, and by seeming to operate so powerfully upon the constitutions of women, she equally appeared to be the patroness and regulatrix of nutrition and passive generation, whence she is said to have received her nymphs or subordinate personifications from the ocean, and is often represented by the symbol of the sea crab, an animal that has the property of spontaneously detaching from its own body any limb that has been hurt or mutilated and reproducing another in its place. This water sign, being symbolic of the maternal principle of nature and recognized by the pagans as the origin of all life, was a natural and consistent domicile of the moon. The autumnal equinox apparently occurs in the constellation of Libra. The balances. The scales tipped and the solar globe began its pilgrimage toward the house of winter. The constellation of the scales was placed in the zodiac to symbolize the power of choice, by means of which man may weigh one problem against another. Millions of years ago, when the human race was in the making, man was like the angels who knew neither good nor evil. He fell into the state of the knowledge of good and evil when the gods gave him the seed for the mental nature. From man's mental reactions to his environments, he distills the product of experience, which then aids him to regain his lost position, plus an individualized intelligence. Paracelsus said, the body comes from the elements, the soul from the stars, and the spirit from God. All that the intellect can conceive of comes from the stars, the spirits of the stars, rather than the material constellations. The constellation of Capricorn, in which the winter solstice theoretically takes place, was called the House of Death. For in winter, all life in the northern hemisphere is at its lowest ebb. Capricorn is a composite creature with the head and upper body of a goat and the tail of a fish. In this constellation, the sun is least powerful in the northern hemisphere, and after passing through this constellation, it immediately begins to increase. Hence, the Greeks said that Jupiter, a name of the sun god, was suckled by a goat. A new and different sidelight on zodiacal symbolism is supplied by John Cole in a treatise on the circular zodiac of Tintira in Egypt. The symbol, therefore, of the goat rising from the body of a fish or Capricorn represents with the greatest propriety the mountainous buildings of Babylon rising out of its low and marshy situation, the two horns of the goat being emblematic of the two towns, Nineveh and Babylon. The former built on the Tigris, the latter on the Euphrates, but both subjected to one sovereignty. The period of 2,160 years required for the regression of the sun through one of the zodiacal constellations is often termed an age. According to this system, the age secured its name from the sign through which the sun passes year after year as it crosses the equator at the vernal equinox. From this arrangement are derived the terms the Taurian age, the Aryan age, the Piscean age, and the Aquarian age. During these periods or ages, religious worship takes the form of the appropriate celestial sign, that which the sun is said to assume as a personality in the same manner that a spirit assumes a body. These 12 signs are the jewels of his breastplate, and his light shines forth from them, one after the other. From a consideration of this system, it is readily understood why certain religious symbols were adopted during different ages of the Earth's history. For during the 2,160 years the sun was in the constellation of Taurus, it is said that the solar deity assumed the body of Apis, and the bull became sacred to Osiris. During the Aryan age, the lamb was held sacred and the priests were called shepherds. Sheep and goats were sacrificed upon the altars, and a scapegoat was appointed to bear the sins of Israel. The microcosm. The pagans believed that the zodiac formed the body of the grand man of the universe. This body, which they called the macrocosm, the great world, was divided into 12 major parts, one of which was under the control of the celestial powers, reposing in each of the zodiacal constellations. Believing that the entire universal system was epitomized in man's body, which they called the microcosm, the little world, they evolved that now familiar figure of the cut-up man in the almanac by allotting a sign of the zodiac to each of the 12 major parts of the human body. During the age of Pisces, the fish was the symbol of divinity, and the sun god fed the multitude with 2 small fishes. The frontispiece of the Inman's ancient faiths show the goddess Isis with a fish on her head, and the Indian savior god Krishna in one of his incarnations was cast from the mouth of a fish. Not only is Jesus often referred to as the fisher of men, but as John P. Lundy writes, the word fish is an abbreviation of this whole title, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, and Cross, or as St. Augustine expresses it, if you join together the initial letters of the 5 Greek words, which means Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, they will make fish, in which word Christ is mystically understood because he was able to live in the abyss of this mortality as in the depth of waters, that is, without sin. Many Christians observe Friday, which is sacred to the Virgin or Venus, upon which day they shall eat fish and not meat. The sign of the fish was one of the earliest symbols of Christianity, and when drawn upon the sand, it informed one Christian that another of the same faith was near. Aquarius is called the sign of the water bearer, or the man with a jug of water on his shoulder mentioned in the New Testament. This is sometimes shown as an angelic figure, supposedly androgynous, either pouring water from an urn or carrying the vessel upon its shoulder. Among Oriental peoples, a water vessel alone is often used. Edward Upham, in his History and Doctrine of Buddhism, describes Aquarius as being in the shape of a pot and of a color between blue and yellow. This sign is the single house of Saturn. When Herschel discovered the planet Uranus, sometimes called by the name of its discoverer, the second half of the sign of Aquarius was allotted to this added member of the planetary family. The water pouring from the urn of Aquarius under the name of the waters of eternal life appears many times in symbolism. So it is with all the signs. Thus, the sun in its path controls whatever form of worship man offers to the supreme deity. There are two distinct systems of astrological philosophy. One of them, the Ptolemaic, is geocentric. The earth is considered the center of the solar system around which the sun, moon, and planets revolve. Astronomically, the geocentric system is incorrect, but for thousands of years, it has proved its accuracy when applied to the material nature of earthly things. A careful consideration of the writings of the great occultists and a study of their diagrams reveal the fact that many of them were acquainted with another method of arranging the heavenly bodies. The other system of astrological philosophy is called the heliocentric. This posits the sun in the center of the solar system where it naturally belongs, with the planets and their moons revolving about it. The great difficulty, however, with the heliocentric system is that being comparatively new, there has not been sufficient time to experiment successfully and catalog the effects of its various aspects and relationships. Geocentric astrology, as its name implies, is confined to the earthly side of nature, while heliocentric astrology may be used to analyze the higher intellectual and spiritual faculties of man. The important point to be remembered is that when the sun was said to be in a certain sign of the zodiac, the ancients really meant that the sun occupied the opposite sign and cast its long ray into the house in which they enthroned it. Therefore, when it is said that the sun is in Taurus, it means astronomically that the sun is in the side opposite to Taurus, which is Scorpio. This resulted in two distinct schools of philosophy, one geocentric and exoteric, the other heliocentric and esoteric. While the ignorant multitudes worshiped the house of the sun's reflection, which in the case described would be the bull, the wise revered the house of the sun's actual dwelling, which would be the scorpion or the serpent, the symbol of the concealed spiritual mystery. This sign has three different symbols. The most common is that of a scorpion, who was called by the ancients the backbiter, being the symbol of deceit and perversion. The second and less common form of the sign is a serpent, often used by the ancients to symbolize wisdom. Probably the rarest form of Scorpio is that of an eagle. The arrangement of the stars of the constellation bears as much resemblance to a flying bird as to a scorpion. Scorpio being, excuse me, Being the sign of occult initiation, the flying eagle, the king of birds, represents the highest and most spiritual type of Scorpio, in which it transcends the venomous insect of the earth. As Scorpio and Taurus are opposite each other in the zodiac, their symbolism is often closely intermingled. The Honorable E.M. Plunkett in Ancient Calendars and Constellations says, the scorpion, the constellation Scorpio of the zodiac opposed to Taurus, joins with Mithras in his attack upon the bull, and always the genie of the spring and autumn equinoxes are present in joyous and mournful attitudes. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, who knew the sun as a bull, called the zodiac a series of furrows through which the great celestial ox dragged the plow of the sun. Hence, the populace offered up sacrifice and led through the streets magnificent steers, bedecked with flowers and surrounded with priests, dancing girls of the temple, and musicians. The philosophic elect did not participate in these idolatrous ceremonials, but advocated them as most suitable for the types of mind composing the mass of the population. These few possessed a far deeper understanding, as the serpent of Scorpio upon their foreheads, the Urius, bore witness. The sun is often symbolized with its rays in the form of a shaggy mane. Concerning the Masonic significance of Leo, Robert Hewitt Brown, 32 Degree, has written, on the 21st of June, when the sun arrives at the summer solstice, the constellation of Leo, being but 30 degrees in advance of the sun, appears to be leading the way, and to aid by his powerful paw in lifting the sun up to the summit of the zodiacal arc. This visible connection between the constellation Leo and the return of the sun to his place of power and glory at the summit of the royal arch of heaven was the principal reason why that constellation was held in such high esteem and reverence by the ancients. The astrologers distinguished Leo as the sole house of the sun and taught that the world was created when the sun was in that sign. The lion was adored in the east and the west by the Egyptians and the Mexicans. The chief druid of Britain was styled a lion. When the Aquarian age is thoroughly established, the sun will be in Leo, as will be noted from the explanation previously given in this chapter regarding the distinction between geocentric and heliocentric astrology. Then, indeed, will the secret religions of the world include once more the raising to initiation by the grip of the lion's paw. Lazarus will come forth. The antiquity of the zodiac is much in dispute. To contend that it originated but a mere few thousand years before the Christian era is a colossal mistake on the part of those who have sought to compile data. Concerning its origin, the zodiac necessarily must be ancient enough to go backward to that period when its signs and symbols coincided exactly with the positions of the constellations, whose various creatures in their natural functions exemplify the outstanding features of the sun's activity during each of the 12 months. One author, after many years of deep study on the subject, believed man's concept of the zodiac to be at least 5 million years old. In all probability, it is one of the many things for which the modern world is indebted to the Atlantean or the Lemurian civilizations. About 10,000 years before the Christian era, there was a period of many ages when knowledge of every kind was suppressed. Tablets destroyed, monuments torn down, and every vestige of available material concerning previous civilizations completely obliterated. Only a few copper knives, some arrowheads, and crude carvings on the walls of caves bear mute witness of those civilizations which preceded this age of destruction. Here and there, a few gigantic structures have remained, which, like the strange monoliths on Easter Island, are evidence of lost arts and sciences and lost races. The human race is exceedingly old. Modern science counts its age in tens of thousands of years, occultism in tens of millions. There is an old saying that Mother Earth has shaken many civilizations from her back, and it is not beyond reason that the principles of astrology and astronomy were evolved millions of years before the first white man appeared. The circular zodiac of Tintira or Tintira. From Cole's treatise, The Circular Zodiac of Tintira in Egypt. The oldest circular zodiac known is the one found at Tintira in Egypt. Girl, making all that noise. What? Girl, get out. Excuse her. So the oldest circular zodiac known is the one found in Tintira in Egypt and now in the possession of the French government. Mr. John Cole describes this remarkable zodiac as follows. The diameter of the medallion in which the constellations are sculptured is 4 feet 9 inches, French measure. It is surrounded by another circle of much larger circumference containing hieroglyphic characters. This second circle is enclosed in a square whose sides are 7 feet 9 inches long. The asterisms constituting the zodiacal constellations mixed with others are represented in a spiral. The extremities of this spiral after one revolution are Leo and Cancer. Leo is no doubt at the head. It appears to be trampling on a serpent and its tail to be held by a woman. Immediately after the lion comes the virgin holding an ear of corn. Further on, we perceive 2 scales of a balance, above which is a metal lion, is the figure of Harpocrates. Then follows the Scorpion and Sagittarius, to whom the Egyptians gave wings and 2 faces. After Sagittarius are successively placed Capricornus, Aquarius, Pisces, the Ram, the Bull, and the Twins. This zodiacal procession is, as we have already observed, terminated by Cancer, the crab. The occultists of the ancient world have a most remarkable understanding of the principle of evolution. They recognized all life as being in various stages of becoming. They believed that grains of sand were in the process of becoming human in consciousness, but not necessarily in form. That human creatures were in the process of becoming planets, that planets were in the process of becoming solar systems, and that solar systems were in the process of becoming cosmic chains, and so on ad infinitum. One of the stages between the solar system and the cosmic chain was called the Zodiac. Therefore, they taught that at a certain time, a solar system breaks up into a zodiac. The house of the zodiac become the thrones for 12 celestial hierarchies, or as certain of the ancient state, 10 divine orders. Pythagoras taught that 10, or the unit of the decimal system, was the most perfect of all numbers, and he symbolized the number 10 by the lesser tetractys, an arrangement of 10 dots in the form of an upright triangle. The early stargazers, after dividing the zodiac into its houses, appointed the 3 brightest stars in each constellation to be the joint rulers of that house. Then they divided the house into 3 sections of 10 degrees each, which they called decans. These in turn were divided in half, resulting in the breaking up of the zodiac into 27 duodecans of 5 degrees each. Over each of these duodecans, the Hebrews placed a celestial intelligence or angel, and from this system has resulted the Kabbalistic arrangement of the 72 sacred names, which correspond to the 72 flowers, knops, and almonds upon the 7-branched candlestick of the tabernacle, and the 72 men who were chosen from the 12 tribes to represent Israel. The only two signs not already mentioned are Gemini and Sagittarius. The constellation of Gemini is generally represented as two small children who, according to the ancients, were born out of eggs, possibly the ones that the bull broke with his horns. The stories concerning Castor and Pollux and Romulus and Remus may be the result of amplifying the myths of these celestial twins. The symbols of Gemini have passed through many modifications. The one used by the Arabians was the peacock. Two of the important stars in the constellation of Gemini still bear the names of Castor and Pollux. The sign of Gemini is supposed to have been the patron of phallic worship, and the two obelisks or pillars in front of temples and churches convey the same symbolism as the twins. The sign of Sagittarius consists of what the ancient Greeks called a centaur, a composite creature, the lower half of whose body was in the form of a horse, while the upper half was human. The centaur is generally shown with a bow and arrow in his hands, aiming a shaft far off into the stars. Hence, Sagittarius stands for two distinct principles. First, it represents the spiritual evolution of man, for the human form is rising from the body of the beast. Secondly, it is the symbol of aspiration and ambition, for as the centaur aims his arrow at the stars, so every human creature aims at a higher mark than he can reach. Albert Churchward, in the Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, sums up the influence of Zodiac upon religious symbolism in the following words. The division here is in 12 parts: the 12 signs of the Zodiac, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 gates of heaven mentioned in Revelation, and 12 entrances or portals to be passed through in the Great Pyramid before finally reaching the highest degree, and 12 apostles in the Christian doctrines, and the 12 original and perfect points in Masonry. The ancients believed that the theory of man's being made in the image of God was to be understood literally. They maintained that the universe was a great organism not unlike the human body, and that every phase and function of the universal body had a correspondence in man. The most precious key to wisdom that the priests communicated to the new initiates was that they termed the law of analogy. Therefore, to the ancients, the study of the stars was a sacred science, for they saw in the movements of the celestial bodies the ever-present activity of the infinite Father. The Pythagoreans were often undeservedly criticized for promulgating the so-called doctrine of metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls. This concept, as circulated among the uninitiated, was merely a blind, however, to conceal a sacred truth. Greek mystics believed that the spiritual nature of man descended into material existence from the Milky Way, the seed ground of souls, through one of the 12 gates of the great Zodiacal band. The spiritual nature was therefore said to incarnate in the form of the symbolic creature created by Magian stargazers to represent the various zodiacal constellations. If the spirit incarnated through the sign of Aries, it was said to be born in the body of a ram. If in Taurus, in the body of the celestial bull. All human beings were thus symbolized by 12 mysterious creatures, through the natures of which they were able to incarnate into the material world. The theory of transmigration was not applicable to the visible material body of man, but rather to the invisible immaterial spirit wandering along the pathway of the stars and sequentially assuming in the course of evolution the forms of the sacred zodiacal animals. In the third book of the Mathesis of Julius Firmicus Maternus appears the following extract concerning the positions of the heavenly bodies at the time of the establishment of the inferior universe. According to Aesculapius, therefore, and Anubius, to whom especially the divinity Mercury committed the secrets of the astrological science, the geniture of the world is as follows. They constituted the sun in the 15th part of Leo, the moon in the 15th part of Cancer, Saturn in the 15th part of Capricorn, Jupiter in the 15th part of Sagittarius, Mars in the 15th part of Scorpio, Venus in the 15th part of Libra, Mercury in the 15th part of Virgo, and the horoscope in the 15th part of Cancer. Conformably to this geniture, therefore, to these conditions of the stars and the testimonies which they adduce in confirmation of this geniture, they are of opinion that the destinies of men also are disposed in accordance with the above arrangement, as may be learnt from the book of Aesculapius, which is called 10,000 or an innumerable multitude of genitures, in order that nothing in the several genitures of men may be found to be discordant with the above mentioned geniture of the world. The 7 ages of man are under the control of the planets in the following order: infancy, the moon; childhood, Mercury; adolescence, Venus; maturity, the sun; middle age, Mars; advanced age, Jupiter; and decrepitude and dissolution, Saturn. Hieroglyphic plan by Hermes of the ancient Zodiac. From Kircher's Oedipus Egypticus. The inner circle contains the hieroglyph of Hemta, the triform and pantomorphic deity. And the 6 concentric bands surrounding the inner circle are, from within outward: 1, the numbers of the zodiacal houses in figures and also in words; 2, the modern names of the houses; 3, the Greek or the Egyptian names of the Egyptian deities assigned to the houses; 4, the complete figures of these deities, the ancient or the modern zodiacal signs, sometimes both; and 6, the number of decans or subdivisions of the houses. The Bembine Table of Isis. A manuscript by Thomas Taylor contains the following remarkable paragraph. Plato was initiated into the greater mysteries at the age of 49. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The Isaic table formed the altar before which the divine Plato stood and received that which was always his, but which the ceremony of the mysteries enkindled and brought from its dormant state. With this ascent, after 3 days in the great hall, he received by the Hierophant of the pyramid. The Hierophant was seen only by those who had passed the 3 days, the 3 degrees, the 3 dimensions, and given verbally the highest esoteric teachings, each accompanied with its appropriate symbol. After a further 3 months sojourn in the halls of the pyramid, the initiate Plato was sent out into the world to do the work of the great order, as Pythagoras and Orpheus had been before him. Before the sacking of Rome in 1527, there is no historical mention of the Mensa Isica tablet of Isis. At that time, the tablet came into the possession of a certain locksmith or ironworker, who sold it at an exorbitant price at Cardinal Bembo, a celebrated antiquary, historiographer of the Republic of Venice, and afterwards librarian of St. Mark's. After his death in 1547, the Isaac tablet was acquired by the House of Mantua. in whose museum it remained until 1630, when troops of Ferdinand II captured the city of Mantua. Several early writers on the subject have assumed that the tablet was demolished by the ignorant soldiery for the silver it contained. The assumption, however, was erroneous. The tablet fell into the hands of Cardinal Pava, who presented it to the Duke of Savoy, who in turn presented it to the King of Sardinia. When the French conquered Italy in 1797, the tablet was carried to Paris. In 1809, Alexander Lenoir, writing on the Mensa Isica, said it was on exhibition at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Upon the establishment of peace between the two countries, it was returned to Italy. In his guide to northern Italy, Karl Baedeker describes the Mensa Isica as being in the center of Gallery 2 in the Museum of Antiquities at Turin. A faithful reproduction of the original tablet was made in 1559 by the celebrated Ennius Vicus of Parma, and a copy of the engraving was given by the Chancellor of the Duke of Bavaria to the Museum of Hieroglyphics. Athanasius Kircher describes the tablet as 5 palms long and 4 wide. W. N. Westcott says it measures 50 by 30 inches. It was made of bronze and decorated with encaustic or smalt enamel and silver inlay. Fosbrook adds, the figures are cut very shallow and the contour of most of them is encircled by threads of silver. The bases upon which the figures were seated or reclined and left blank in the prints were of silver and are torn away. The Bembine Table of Isis. Concerning the theurgic or magic sense in which the Egyptian priest exhibited in the Bembine Tablet Table of Isis, the philosophy of sacrifice, rites, and ceremonies by system of occult symbols, Athanasius Kircher writes, the early priests believed that a great spiritual power was invoked by correct and unabridged sacrificial ceremonies. If one feature were lacking, the whole was vitiated, says Iamblichus. Hence, they were most careful in all details, for they considered it absolutely essential for the entire chain of logical connections to be exactly according to ritual. Certainly, for no other reason did they prepare and prescribe for future use the manuals, as it were, for conducting the rites. They learned, too, what the first hieromancers possessed, as it were, by a divine fury, devised as a system of symbolism for exhibiting their mysteries. These they placed in this tablet of Isis before the eyes of those admitted to the sanctum sanctorum in order to teach the nature of the gods and the prescribed forms of sacrifice. Since each of the orders of gods had its own peculiar symbols, gestures, costumes, and ornaments, they thought it necessary to observe these in the whole apparatus of worship, as nothing was more efficacious in drawing the benign attention of the deities as genii or genie. Thus, their temples, remote from the usual haunts of men, contained representations of nearly every form in nature. First, in the pavement, they symbolized the physical economy of the world using minerals, stones, and other things suitable for ornaments, including little streams of water. The walls showed the starry world, and the dome the world of genii. In the center was the altar to suggest the emanations of the supreme mind from its center. Thus, the entire interior constituted a picture of the universe of worlds. The priests, in making sacrifices, wore raiment adorned with figures similar to those attributed to the gods. Their bodies were particularly bare, like those of the deities, and they themselves were divested of all material cares and practices the strictest chastity. Their heads were veiled to indicate their charge of earthly things. Their heads and bodies were shaved, for they regarded hair as a useless excrescence. Upon the head they bore the same insignia as those attributed to the gods. Thus arrayed, they regarded themselves to be transformed into the intelligence with which they constantly desired to be identified. For example, in order to call down to the world the soul and spirit of the universe, they stood before the image shown in the center of our tablet, wearing the same symbols as that figure and its attendants, and offered sacrifices. By these and the accompanying singing of hymns, they believed that they infallibly drew the gods' attention to their prayer. And so they did in regard to other regions of the tablet, believing of necessity the proper ritual properly carried out would evoke the deity desired. That this was the origin of the science of oracles is apparent, as a touched chord produces a harmony of sound. Likewise, the adjoining chords respond though not touched. Similarly, the idea they expressed by their concurrent acts while adoring the god came into accord with basic idea, and by an intellectual union, it was returned to them deiformed, and they thus obtained the idea of ideas. Hence, there sprang up in their souls, they thought, the gift of prophecy and divination, and they believed they could foretell future events, impending evils, etc. For as in the supreme mind, everything is simultaneous and spaceless, the future is therefore present in that mind, and they thought that while the human mind was absorbed in the supreme by contemplation, by that union they were enabled to know all the future. Nearly all that is represented in our tablet consists of amulets, which by analogy above described would inspire them, under the described conditions, with the virtues of the supreme power, and enable them to receive good and avert evil. They also believed they could in this magical manner effect cures of diseases, that genii could be induced to appear them during sleep and cure or teach them to cure the sick. In this belief, they consulted the gods about all sorts of doubts and difficulties, while adorned with the simulacra of the mystic rite and intently contemplating the divine ideas. And while so enraptured, they believed the god by some sign, nod, or gesture communicated with them, whether asleep or awake, concerning the truth or falsity of the matter in point. Those familiar with the fundamental principles of Hermetic philosophy will recognize in the Mensa Isiaca the key to Chaldean, Egyptian, and Greek theology. In his Antiquities, the learned Benedictine Father Mountfaucon admits his inability to cope with the intricacies of its symbolism. He therefore doubts that the emblems upon the tablet possess any significance worthy of consideration, and ridicules Kircher, declaring him to be more obscure than the tablet itself. Laurentius Pignorius reproduced the tablet in connection with a descriptive essay in 1605, but his timidly advanced explanations demonstrated his ignorance concerning the actual interpretation of the figures. In his Oedipus Egypticus, published in 1654, Kircher attacked the problem with characteristic avidity. Being peculiarly qualified for such a task by years of research in matters pertaining to the secret doctrines of antiquity, and with the assistance of a group of eminent scholars, Kircher accomplished much towards the exposition of the mysteries of the tablet. The master secret, however, eluded even him, as Eliphas Levi had truly noted in his History of Magic. The learned Jesuit, writes Levi, defined that it contained the hieroglyphic key to sacred alphabets, though he was unable to develop the explanation. It is divided into 3 equal compartments. Above are the 12 houses of heaven, and below are the corresponding distributions of labor or work periods throughout the year, while in the middle place are 21 sacred signs answering to the letters of the alphabet. In the midst of all is a seated figure of the pantomorphic inks, emblem of universal being, and corresponding as such to the Hebrew word to the Hebrew yod, or to that unique yet letter from which all the other letters were formed. The inks is encircled by the Ophite triad, answering to the three mother letters of the Egyptian and Hebrew alphabets. On the right are the Ibomorphic and Serapian triads. On the left are those Nephthys and Hecate, representing active and passive, fixed and volatile, fructifying fire and generating water. Each pair of triads in conjunction with the center produces a septenary, and a septenary is contained in the center. The three septenaries furnish the absolute number of the three worlds, as well as the complete number of primitive letters to which a complementary sign is added, like 0 to the 9 numerals. Levi's key to the Bembine Table, from Levi's History of Magic. The Isis Tablet, writes Levi, is a key to the ancient book of thought, which has survived to some extent the lapse of centuries and is pictured to us in the still comparatively ancient set of Tarachi cards. To him, the Book of Thoth was a resume of the esoteric learning of the Egyptians. After the decadence of their civilization, this lore became crystallized in a hieroglyphic form as the tarot. This tarot having become partially or entirely forgotten or misunderstood, its pictured symbols fell into the hands of the sham diviners and of the providers of the public amusement by games of cards. The modern tarot or taroshi pack of cards consists of 78 cards, of which 22 form a special group of trumps of pictorial design. The remaining 56 are composed of 4 suits of 10 numerals and 4 court cards: king, queen, knight, and knave or valet. The suits are swords, militarism, cups, sacerdocy, clubs or wands, agriculture, and shekels or coins, commerce, answering respectively to our spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds. Our purpose is with the 22 trumps. These form the special characteristic of the pack and are the lineal descendants of the hieroglyphics of the tarot. These 22 respond to the letters of the Hebrew and other sacred alphabets, which fall naturally into 3 classes of a trio of mothers, a heptad of doubles, and a duodecad of simple letters. They are also considered a triad of heptads and one apart, a system of initiation and an uninitiate. Levi's hint may be construed to mean that the 21 figures in the center section of the table represent the 21 major trumps of the tarot cards. If this be so, is not the 0 card cause of so much controversy, the nameless crown of the supreme mind, the crown being symbolized by the hidden triad in the upper part of the throne in the center of the table? Might not the first emanation of this supreme mind be well symbolized by a juggler or a magician with the symbols of the 4 lower worlds spread out on a table before him: the rod, the sword, the cup, and the coin? Thus considered, the 0 card belongs nowhere among the others, but is in fact the 4th dimensional point from which they all emanated, and consequently is broken up into the 21 cards or letters which, when gathered together, produce the 0. The cipher appearing upon this card would substantiate this interpretation, for the cipher or circle is emblematic of the superior sphere from which issue the lower worlds, powers, and letters. Westcott carefully collected the all too meager theories advanced by various authorities in the 1887 published his now extremely rare volume, which contains the only detailed description of the Zodiac tablet published in English since Humphreys translated Montfaucon's worthless description in 1721. After explaining his reticence to reveal that which Levi evidently felt was better left concealed, Westcott sums up his interpretation of the tablet as follows. The diagram of Levi by which he explains the mystery of the tablet shows the upper region divided into the 4 seasons of the year, each with 3 signs of the zodiac, and he has added the 4-lettered sacred name, the tetragrammaton, assigning Yod to Aquarius, that is Canopus, He to Taurus, that is Apis, Va to Leo, that is Mopta, and He final to Typhon. Note the cherubic parallel: man, bull, lion, and eagle. The 4th form is found either as scorpion or eagle, depending upon the occult good or evil intention. In the demotic zodiac, the snake replaces the scorpion. The lower region he ascribes to the 12 simple Hebrew letters, associating them with the 4 quarters of the horizon. Compare the Sefer Yetzirah, whatever. The central region he ascribes to the solar powers and the planetary. In the middle, we see above the sun marked Ops, and below it is a Solomon seal. Above a cross, a double triangle hexapla, one light and one dark triangle superposed, the whole forming a sort of complex symbol of Venus. To the Ibamorphous, he gives the 3 dark planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars, placed around a dark triangle, erect, denoting fire. To the Neptune triad, he gives 3 light planets, Saturn, Luna, and Jupiter, around a light inverted triangle, which denotes water. There is a necessary connection between water, female power, passive principle, Bina, and Sephardic mother and bride. See the Kabbalah by Mathers. Note, the ancient signs for the planets were all composed of a cross, solar disk, and crescent. Venus is a cross below a sun disk, Mercury a disk with a crescent above and cross below. Saturn is a cross whose lowest point touches the apex of the crescent. Jupiter is a crescent whose lowest point touches the left-hand end of a cross. All these are deep mysteries. Note that Levi in his original plate transposed Serapis and Hecate, but not the Apis Noir and Apis Blanc, perhaps because of the head of Bes being associated by him with Hecate. Note that having referred the 12 simple letters to the lower, the 7 double must correspond to the central region of the planets, and then the great triad AMS, the mother letters representing air, water, and fire, remain to be pictured. Around S, the central inks, or Yod, by the Ophionian triad, the 2 serpents, and the Leonine sphinx. Levi's word ops in the center is the Latin ops terra, genius of the earth, and the Greek ops Rhea or Kubel, Sibyl, often drawn as a goddess seated in a chariot drawn by lions. She is crowned with turrets and holds a key. Westcott's key to the Bembine Table from Westcott's The Zodiac Tablet. Zoroaster declared that the number 3 shines throughout the world. This is revealed by the Bembine Table by a series of triads representing the creative impulses. Of the Zodiac Table, Alexander Lenore writes, the Zodiac Table as a work of art is not of great interest. It is but a composition rather cold and insignificant, whose figures summarily sketched and methodically placed near each other give but little impression of life. But if, on the contrary, after examining it, we understand the purpose of the author, we become soon convinced that the Isiac table is an image of the heavenly sphere divided in small parts to be used very like for general teaching. According to that idea, we can conclude that the Isiac table was originally the introduction to a collection followed by the mysteries of Isis. It was engraved on copper in order to be used in the ceremonial of initiation. The essay, published in French by Alexandre Lenoir in 1809, while curious and original, contains little real information on the tablet, which the author seeks to prove was an Egyptian calendar or astrological chart. As both Montfaucon and Lenoir, in fact, all writers on the subject since 1651, either have based their work upon that of Kircher or have been influenced considerably by him. A careful translation has been made of the latter's original article, 80 pages of 17th century Latin. The double-page plate at the beginning of this chapter is a faithful reproduction made by Kircher from the engraving in the Museum of Hieroglyphics. The small letters and numbers used to designate the figures were added by him to clarify his commentary and will be used for the same purpose in this work. Like nearly all religious and philosophical antiquities, the Bembine Table of Isis has been the subject of much controversy. In a footnote, A.E. Waite, unable to differentiate between the true and the purported nature or origin of the tablet, echoes the sentiments of J.G. Wilkinson, another eminent exotericist. The original table is exceedingly late and is roughly termed a forgery. On the other hand, Edward Winckelmann, a man of profound learning, defends the genuineness and antiquity of the tablet. A sincere consideration of the Mensa Isiaca discloses one fact of paramount importance, that although whoever fashioned the table was not necessarily an Egyptian, he was an initiate of the highest order, conversant with the most arcane tenets of Hermetic esotericism. Symbolism of the Bembine Table. The following necessarily brief elucidation of the Bembine Table is based upon a digest of the writings of Kircher, supplemented by other information gleaned by the present author from the mystical writings of the Chaldeans, Hebrews, Egyptians, and Greeks. The temples of the Egyptians were so designed that the arrangement of chambers, decorations, and utensils was all of symbolic significance, as shown by the hieroglyphics that covered them. Beside the altar, which usually was in the center of each room, was the cistern of Nile water, which flowed in and out through unseen pipes. Here also were images of the gods in concatenated series, accompanied by magical inscriptions. In these temples, by use of symbols and hieroglyphics, neophytes were instructed in the secrets of the sacerdotal caste. The tablet of Isis was originally a table or altar, and its emblems were part of the mysteries explained by priests. Tables were dedicated to the various gods and goddesses. In this case, Isis was so honored. The substances from which the tables were made differed according to the relative dignities of the deities. The tables consecrated to Jupiter and Apollo were of gold. Those to Diana, Venus, and Juno were of silver. Those to the other superior gods of marble. Those to the lesser divinities of wood. Tables were also made of metals corresponding to the planets governed by the various celestials. As food for the body is spread on a banquet table, so on these sacred altars were spread the symbols which, when understood, feed the invisible nature of man. In his introduction to the table, Kircher summarizes its symbolism thus. It teaches, in the first place, the whole constitution of the threefold world, archetypal, intellectual, and sensible. The supreme divinity is shown moving from the center to the circumference of a universe made up of both sensible and inanimate things, all of which are animated and agitated by one supreme power, which they call the Father Mind, and represented by a threefold symbol. Here also are shown three triads from the Supreme One, each manifesting one attribute of the first Trimurti. These triads are called the foundation or the base of all things. In the table is also set forth the arrangement and distribution of those divine creatures that aid the Father Mind in the control of the universe. Here in the upper panel are to be seen the governors of the world, each with its fiery, ethereal, and material insignia. Here also in the lower panel are the fathers of fountains, whose duty it is to care for and preserve the principles of all things and sustain the inviolable laws of nature. Here are the gods of the spheres and also those who wander from place to place, laboring with all substances and forms, Zonia and Azonia, grouped together as figures of both sexes with their faces turned to their superior deity. The Mensa Isiaca, which is divided horizontally into three chambers or panels, may represent the ground plan of the chambers in which the Isiac mysteries were given. The center panel is divided into 7 parts or lesser rooms, and the lower has 2 gates, one at each end. The entire table contains 45 figures of first importance and a number of lesser symbols. The 45 main figures are grouped into 15 triads, of which 4 are in the upper panel, 7 in the central, and 4 in the lower. According to both Kircher and Levi, the triads are divided in the following manner. In the upper section, 1, P, S, and V, Mendician triad, 2, X, Z, and A, Ammonian triad, 3, B, C, D, Montian triad in the upper section. 4, F, G, H, Amptian triad, and in the center section, G, I, K, Isiac triad, L, M, N, Hecatine triad, O, Q, R, Ibimorphous triad, V, S, W, Ophionic triad, X, Y, Z, Neptune triad, and I don't know what that is, Serapian triad, and the Osirian triad. In the lower section, Horian triad, 2, Pandokian triad, 3, Thostic triad, and 4, Luristic triad. Of these 15 triads, Kircher writes, the figures differ from each other in 8 highly important respects, according to form, position, gesture, act, raiment, headdress, staff, and lastly, according to the hieroglyphics placed around them, whether these be flowers, shrubs, small letters, or animals. These 8 symbolic methods of portraying the secret powers of the figures are subtle reminders of the 8 spiritual senses of cognition by means of which the real self in man may be comprehended. To express this spiritual truth, the Buddhists used the wheel with 8 spokes and raised their consciousness by means of the Noble Eightfold Path. The ornamented border enclosing the 3 main panels of the table contains many symbols consisting of birds, animals, reptiles, human beings, and composite forms. According to one reading of the table, this border represents the 4 elements. The creatures are elemental beings. According to another interpretation, the border represents the archetypal spheres, and in its frieze of composite figures are the patterns of those forms which in various combinations will subsequently manifest themselves in the material world. The 4 flowers at the corners of the table are those which, because their blossoms always face the sun and follow its course across the sky, are sacred emblems of that finer part of man's nature which delights in facing its creator. According to the secret doctrine of the Chaldeans, the universe is divided into 4 states of being, planes or spheres: archetypal, intellectual, sidereal, and elemental. Each of these reveals the others, the superior controlling the inferior, and the inferior receiving influence from the superior. The archetypal plane was considered synonymous with the intellect of the triune divinity. Within this divine, incorporeal, and eternal sphere are included all the lower manifestations of life, all that is, has been, or ever shall be. Within the cosmic intellect, all things spiritual or material exist as archetypes or divine thought forms, which is shown in the table by a chain of secret similes. In the middle region of the table appears the all form containing personified spiritual essence, the source and substance of all things. From this proceed the lower worlds as 9 emanations in groups of 3, the Ophionic, Ibimorphous, and Neptian triads. Consider in this connection the analogy of the Kabbalistic Sephiroth, or the 9 spheres issuing from Kether the crown. The 12 governors of the universe, the Mendician, Ammonian, Mamtian, and Omphitian triads, vehicles for the distribution of the creative influences, and shown in the upper region of the table, are directed in their activities by the divine mind patterns existing in the archetypal sphere. The archetypes are abstract patterns formulated in the divine mind, and by them all the inferior activities are controlled. In the lower region of the table are the father fountains, the Horian, Pandokian, Gnostic, and Eucharistic triads, keepers of the great gates of the universe. These distribute to the lower worlds the influences descending from the governors shown above. In the theology of the Egyptians, goodness takes precedence and all things partake of its nature to a higher or lower degree. Goodness is sought by all. It is the prime cause of causes. Goodness is self-diffused and hence exists in all things. For nothing can produce that which it does not have in itself. The table demonstrates that all is in God and God is in all, that all is in all and each is in each. In the intellectual world are invisible spiritual counterparts of the creatures which inhabit the elemental world. Therefore, the lowest exhibits the highest, the corporeal declares the intellectual, and the invisible made manifest by its works. For this reason, the Egyptians made images of substances existing in the inferior sensible world to serve as visible exemplars of superior and invisible powers. To the corruptible images, they assigned the virtues of the incorruptible divinities, thus demonstrating arcanely that this world is but the shadow of God, the outward picture of the paradise within. All that is in the invisible archetypal sphere is revealed in the sensible corporeal world by the light of nature. The archetypal and creative mind first thought its paternal foundation and afterwards through secondary gods called intelligences, poured over the world, poured out the whole infinity of its powers by continuous exchange from highest to lowest. In their phallic symbolism, the Egyptians used the sperm to represent the spiritual spheres, because each contains all that comes forth from it. The Chaldeans and Egyptians also held that everything which is a result dwells in the cause of itself and turns to that cause as the lotus to the sun. Accordingly, the supreme intellect, through its paternal foundation, first created light, the angelic world. Out of that light were then created the invisible hierarchies of beings, which some call the stars, and out of the stars the 4 elements and the sensible world were formed. Thus, all are in all after their respective kinds. All visible bodies or elements are in the invisible stars or spiritual elements, and the stars are likewise in those bodies. The stars are in the angels, and the angels in the stars. The angels are in God, and God is in all. Therefore, all are divinely in the divine, angelically in the angels, and corporeally in the corporeal world, and vice versa. Just as the seed is the tree folded up, so the world is God unfolded. Proclus says, every property of divinity permeates all creation and gives itself to all inferior creatures. One of the manifestations of the supreme mind is the power of reproduction according to species, which it confers upon every creature of which it is the divine part. Thus, souls, heavens, elements, animals, plants, and stones generate themselves, each according to its pattern. But all are dependent upon the one fertilizing principle existing in the supreme mind. The fecundative power, though of itself a unit, manifests differently through the various substances, for in the mineral it contributes to material existence. In the plant it manifests as vitality, and in the animal as sensibility. It imparts motion to the heavenly bodies, thought to the souls of men, intellectuality to the angels, and super essentiality to God. Thus, it is seen that all forms are of one substance and all life of one force, and these are coexistence in the nature of the Supreme One. This doctrine was first expounded by Plato. His disciple Aristotle set it forth in these words. We say that this sensible world is an image of another. Therefore, since this world is vivid or alive, how much more then that other must live? Yonder, therefore, above the stellar virtues, stand other heavens to be attained, like the heavens of this world, beyond them, because they are of a higher kind, brighter and vaster, nor are they distant from each other like this one, for they are incorporeal. Yonder too exists an earth, not of inanimate matter, but vivid with animal life and all natural terrestrial phenomena like this one, but of other kinds and perfections. There are plants also, and gardens and flowing water. There are aquatic animals, but of nobler species. Yonder is air and life appropriate to it, all immortal. And although the life there is analogous to ours, yet it is nobler, seeing that it is intellectual, perpetual, and unalterable. For if anyone should object and ask, how in the world above do the plants, etc., above mentioned find footing? We should answer that they do not have objective existence, for they were produced by the primal author in an absolute condition and without exteriorization. They are therefore in the same case as intellect and soul. They suffer no defects such as waste and corruption, since the beings yonder are full of energy, strength, and joy, as living in a life sublime and being the issue of one fount and of one quality, compounded of all like sweet savors, delicate perfumes, harmonious color and sound, and other perfections. Nor do they move violently about, nor intermix, nor corrupt each other, but each perfectly preserves its own essential character, and they are simple and do not multiply as corporeal beings do. In the midst of the table is a great covered throne with a seated female figure representing Isis, but here called the Pantophomorphic inks. G.R.S. Mead defines the inks as a transmitting intelligence. Others have declared it to be a symbol of universal being. Over the head of the goddess, the throne is surmounted by a triple crown, and beneath her feet is the house of material substance. The threefold crown is here symbolic of the triune divinity, called by the Egyptians the supreme mind, and described in the Sefer HaZohar as being hidden and unrevealed. According to the Hebrew system of Kabbalism, the tree of the Sephiroth was divided into two parts, the upper invisible and the lower visible. The upper consisted of 3 parts and the lower of 7. The 3 uncognizable Sephiroth were called Kether, the crown, Kokma, wisdom, and Bina, understanding. These are too abstract to permit of comprehension, whereas the lower 7 spheres that came forth from them were within the grasp of human consciousness. The central panel contains 7 triads of figures. These represent the lower Sephiroth, all emanating from the concealed threefold crown over the throne. Kershaw writes, the throne denotes the diffusion of the triform supreme mind along the universal paths of the 3 worlds. Out of these 3 intangible spheres emerges the sensible universe, which Plutarch calls the House of Horns, and the Egyptians the Great Gate of the Gods. The top of the throne is in the midst of diffused serpent-shaped flames, indicating that the supreme mind is filled with light and light, eternal and incorruptible, removed from all material contact. How the supreme mind communicated his fire to all creatures is clearly set forth in the symbolism of the table. The divine fire is communicated to lower spheres through the universal power of nature, personified by the world virgin Isis. Here dominated the inks, or the polymorphous, all containing universal idea. The word idea is here used in its Platonic sense. Plato believed that there are eternal forms of all possible things which exist without matter, and to these eternal and immaterial forms he gave the name of ideas. In the Platonic sense, ideas were the patterns according to which the deity fashioned the phenomenal or archetypal world. Kershaw describes the 21 figures in the central panel thus: 7 principal triads corresponding to 7 superior worlds are shown in the central section of the table. They all originate from the fiery, invisible archetype, the triple crown of the throne. The first, the Ophionic or Inks triad, VSW, corresponds to the vital and fiery world and is the first intellectual world, called by the ancients the Ethereum. Zoroaster says of it, "Oh, what rigorous rulers this world has." The second, or Ebimorphous triad, OQR, corresponds to the second intellectual or ethereal world and is concerned with the principle of humidity. The third, or Nepthian triad, XYZ, corresponds to the third intellectual and ethereal world and is concerned with fecundity. These are the 3 triads of the ethereal worlds, which correspond to the Father foundation. Then follow the 4 triads of the sensible or material worlds, of which the first 2 correspond to the sidereal worlds, GIK, and namely Osiris and Isis, sun and moon, indicated by 2 bulls. They are followed by 2 triads, the hectokine, LMN, and the Serapian, VNO, if I don't know if I'm saying that right, corresponding to the sublunary and the subterranean worlds. These complete and 7 worlds of primary genii ruling the natural universe. Celis quotes Zoroaster. The Egyptians and the Chaldeans taught that there were 7 corporeal worlds, worlds ruled by the intellectual powers. The first is of pure fire, the second, third, and fourth ethereal, the 5th, 6th, and 7th material. The 7th being the one called terrestrial and hater of light, and is located under the moon, comprising within itself the matter called fundus or foundation. These 7 plus the one invisible crown constitute the 8 worlds. Plato writes that it is needful for the philosopher to know how the 7 circles beneath the first one are arranged according to the Egyptians. The first triad of fire denotes life. The second, water, over which ruled the ebimorphous divinities, and the third, air, ruled by Nepta. From the fire the heavens were created, from the water the earth, and air was the mediator between them. In the Sephira Yetzirah, it is said that from the 3 originate the 7, or the height, the depth, the east, the west, the north, and the south, and the holy temple in the center, sustaining them all. It is not the holy temple in the center, the great throne of many formed spirit of nature, which is shown in the middle of the tablet. What are the seven triads but the seven powers that rule over the world? Celis writes, the Egyptians worshiped the triad of faith, truth, and love. And the seven fountains, the sun as ruler, the fountain of matter, then the fountain of the archangels, the fountain of the senses, of judgment, of lightning, of reflections, and of characters of unknown composition. They say that the highest material fountains are those of Apollo, Osiris, and Mercury, the fountains of the centers of the elements. Thus, they understood by the sun as ruler the solar world, by the material archangelic, the lunar world, by the fountain of the senses, the world of Saturn, by judgment, Jupiter, by lightning, Mars, by that of the reflections or mirrors, the world of Venus, by the fountain of characters, the world of Mercury. All these are shown by the figures in the center plane of the tablet. The upper panel contains the 12 figures of the zodiac arranged in 4 triads. The center figure in each group represents one of the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. S is the sign of Aquarius, Z, Taurus, C, Leo, and G, Scorpio. These are called the fathers. In the secret teachings of the Far East, these 4 figures, the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle, are called the winged globes of the 4 Maharajas who stand upon the corners of creation. The 4 cardinal signs, P, Capricorn, X, Aries, B, Cancer, F, Libra, are called the powers. The 4 common signs, V, Pisces, A, Gemini, E, Virgo, and H, Sagittarius, are called the minds of the 4 lords. This explains the meaning of the winged globes of Egypt. For the 4 central figures, Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio, called by Ezekiel the cherubim, are the globes. The cardinal and common signs on either side are the wings. Therefore, the 12 signs of the zodiac may be symbolized by 4 globes, each with 2 wings. The celestial triads are further shown by the Egyptians as a globe, the father, from which issue a serpent, the mind, and wings, the power. These 12 forces are the fabricators of the world, and from them emanate the microcosm, or the mystery of the 12 sacred animals, representing in the universe the 12 parts of the world, and in man the 12 parts of the human body. Anatomically, the 12 figures in the upper panel may well symbolize the 12 convolutions of the brain, and the 12 figures in the lower panel, the 12 zodiacal members and organs of the human body. For man is a creature formed of the 12 sacred animals, with his members and organs under the direct control of the 12 governors or powers resident in the brain. A more profound interpretation is found in the correspondences between the 12 figures in the upper panel and the 12 in the lower. This furnishes a key to one of the most arcane of the ancient secrets, the relationship existing between the 2 great zodiacs, the fixed and the movable. The fixed zodiac is described as an immense dodecahedron. Its 12 surfaces representing the outermost walls of abstract space. From each surface of this dodecahedron, a great spiritual power radiating inward becomes embodied as one of the hierarchies of the movable zodiac, which is a band of circumambulating so-called fixed stars. Within this movable zodiac are posited the various planetary and elemental bodies. The relation of these 2 zodiacs to the zodiacal spheres has a correlation to the respiratory system of the human body. The great fixed zodiac may be said to represent the atmosphere, the movable zodiac, the lungs, and the sub-zodiacal worlds, the body. The spiritual atmosphere containing the vivifying energies of the 12 divine powers of the great fixed zodiac is inhaled by the cosmic lungs, the movable zodiac, and distributed by them through the constitution of the 12 holy animals, which are parts and members of the material universe. The functional cycle is completed when the poisonous effluvia of the lower worlds collected by the movable zodiac are exhaled into the great fixed zodiac, there to be purified by being passed through the divine natures of its 12 eternal hierarchies. The table as a whole is susceptible of many interpretations. If the border of the table with its hieroglyphic figures be accepted as the spiritual source, then the throne in the center represents the physical body within which human nature is enthroned. From this point of view, the entire table becomes emblematic of the auric bodies of man, with the border as the outer extremity or shell of the auric egg. If the throne be accepted as the symbol of the spiritual sphere, the border typifies the elements, and the various panels surrounding the central one become emblematic of the worlds or planes emanating from the one divine source. If the table be considered from a purely physical basis, the throne becomes a symbolic of the generative system, and the table reveals the secret processes of embryology as applied to the formation of the material world. If a purely physiological and anatomical interpretation be desired, the central throne becomes the heart, the Ibimorphous triad, the mind, the Neptune triad, the generative system, and the surrounding hieroglyphics, the various parts and members of the human body. From the evolutionary viewpoint, the central gate becomes the point of both entrance and exit. Here also is set forth the process of initiation, in which the candidate, after passing successfully through the various ordeals, is finally brought into the presence of his own soul, which he alone is capable of unveiling. If cosmogony be the subject of consideration, the central panel represents the spiritual worlds, the upper panel the intellectual worlds, and the lower panel the material worlds. The central panel may also symbolize the 9 invisible worlds, and the creature marked T, the physical nature, the footstool of Isis, the spirit of universal life. Considered in the light of alchemy, the central panel contains the metals and the borders the alchemical processes. The figure seated on the throne is the universal Mercury, the stone of the wise. The flaming canopy of the throne above is the divine sulfur, and the cube of earth beneath is the elemental salt. The 3 triads or the paternal foundation in the central panel represent the silent watchers, the 3 invisible parts of the nature of man. The 2 panels on either side are the quaternary lower nature of man. In the central panel are 21 figures. This number is sacred to the sun, which consists of 3 great powers, each with 7 attributes. And by Kabbalistic reduction, 21 becomes 3, or the great triad. It will yet be proved that the table of Isis is directly connected with Egyptian Gnosticism, for in Gnostic papyrus preserved in the Bodleian Library, there is a direct reference to the 12 fathers of paternities, beneath whom are 12 fountains. That the lower panel represents the underworld is further emphasized by the 2 gates, the great gate of the east and the great gate of the west. For in the Chaldean theology, the sun rises and sets through gates in the underworld, where it wanders during the hours of darkness. As Plato was for 13 years under the instruction of the Magi Pathaneth, Ocops, Nophis, and Etemen of Sebennythus, his philosophy Consequently, is permeated with the Chaldean and Egyptian system of triads. The Bembine Tablet, the Bembine Table is a diagrammatic exposition of the so-called Platonic philosophy, for in its design is epitomized the entire theory of mystic cosmogony and generation. The most valuable guide to the interpretation of this table is the commentaries of Proclus on the theology of Plato. The Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster and also contains many allusions to the theogonic principles which are demonstrated by the table. The theogony of Hesiod contains the most complete account of the Greek cosmogony myth. Orphic cosmogony has left its impress upon the various forms of philosophy and religion, Greek, Egyptian, and Syrian, which it contacted. Chief of the Orphic symbols was the mundane egg from the fanes sprang into light. Thomas Taylor considers the Orphic egg to be synonymous with the mixture from bound and infinity mentioned by Plato in the Philebus. The egg is furthermore the third intelligible triad and the proper symbol of the demiurges, whose auric body is the egg of the inferior universe. Eusebius, on the authority of Porphyry, declared that the Egyptians acknowledged one intellectual author or creator of the world under the name of Neph, and that they worshipped him in a statue of human form and dark blue complexion, holding in his hand a girdle and a scepter, wearing on his head a royal plume, and thrusting forth an egg out of his mouth. See an analysis of Egyptian mythology. While the Bembine table is rectangular shaped, it signifies philosophically the Orphic egg of the universe with its contents. In the esoteric doctrines, the supreme individual achievement is the breaking of the Orphic egg, which is equivalent to the return of the spirit to the nirvana, the absolute condition of the Oriental mystics. The New Pantheon by Samuel Boyce contains 3 plates showing various sections of the Bembine table. The author, however, makes no important contribution to the knowledge of the subject. In the mythology and fables of the ancients explained from history, the Abbe Benir devotes a chapter to a consideration of the Mensa Isiaca. After reviewing the conclusions of Montfaucon, Kisher, and Pignorius, he adds, I am of the opinion that it was a votive table which some prince or private person had consecrated to Isis as an acknowledgement for some benefit which he believed she conferred upon him.